Chapter 141, Paper Talk. It was 6:45 in the morning in the Ravenclaw dormitory when Harry returned from breakfast to find a neatly wrapped parcel sitting at the foot of his bed. He peeled back the paper, and out rolled the broomstick, landing with a soft thud on his rumpled sheets. "Wow!" Ron blurted, practically salivating as he knelt beside the broom, his hands trembling as he stroked its gleaming shaft. Everyone else crowded in, voicing their admiration. Anthony, who normally munched on biscuits he'd stashed away, and a few other Ravenclaws, all craning to get a closer look. Harry tried to see over the wall of bodies, stretching onto his tiptoes, but even that wasn't enough. Ron was too tall. So he cleared his throat, hoping to catch his friend's attention. Ron barely heard him. He was utterly entranced, emitting low, awed sighs like a groom catching his first glimpse of his bride on their wedding night. The sounds were hard to ignore. Ryan, who'd been deep in conversation with Hermione, broke off mid-sentence and scowled in disgust as Ron's infatuated murmurs filled the air. Fortunately, not everyone was so distracted. Anthony gave Ron a good-natured shove, Neville joined in, and together they gently ejected him back from the bed. At last, Harry had an unobstructed view of the broom he'd been waiting a full week to receive. It really was a work of art. The Nimbus 2000 gleamed under the torchlight, its curves smooth and lustrous. The handle was polished mahogany, the tail a neat bundle of straight, perfectly aligned twigs, and there, stamped in bold golden letters, was its name, Nimbus 2000. "Hey, what are you doing? It's almost 6:50. We've got to go." Ron's shout broke the spell. He'd been staring at the broom as though he'd never seen one before. Since arriving at Hogwarts, Ron Weasley, once the underdog of a large wizarding family, seemed to have forgotten even how to read a room. Well, almost. He at least knew keeping an eye on the clock was crucial. 7 o'clock would be here in minutes. Twilight was settling over the grounds as Harry, Ron, and the others filed out of the castle and set off toward the Quidditch pitch. Hermione and Ryan lagged a few paces behind. Harry opened his mouth, clearly about to tease Ryan for trailing, but a group of Gryffindor Quidditch enthusiasts surged around him, shepherding him forward. Before long, they reached the stadium. From ground level, the stands soared in high, sweeping tiers, hundreds of seats so every spectator could follow the action on the pitch. At either end stood 3 tall golden poles, each crowned with a gleaming hoop. Ryan paused to take it all in. The circular rings glinted in the dusk, recalling the little bubble ring toys he'd played with as a child. He shook off the memory, turned back to his friends, and hurried on. Quidditch was about to begin. He'd first encountered these giant soap bubbles at Huohuo's cottage, where she used them to brew laundry detergent. Floating into the sky, the iridescent orbs spread across the horizon and caught the sunlight in a riot of color. Today, however, their scale had grown even more spectacular. Each ring soared 50 feet above the Quidditch pitch, drifting lazily over the goal hoops. The crowd buzzed with anticipation. Everyone had assumed Roger Davis and the Puddlemere United players would be here, but Davis was nowhere to be seen, nor were the other famous seekers. Under Anthony's enthusiastic applause and Ron's persistent encouragement, Harry pretended to hesitate. In reality, he could hardly wait to mount his broom. With a grin, he kicked off from the turf and shot into the air. He wove between the towering bubble rings, banked above the goalposts, then dove and swept up again, as light and nimble as an elf dancing through an enchanted forest. On the ground, Ron and the rest of the team jumped to their feet, shouting praise with every twist and barrel roll. In the stands, Ryan and Hermione had slipped into seats near the back, ostensibly to read, but even they couldn't tear their eyes away. They exchanged amused smiles every time Harry looped overhead. "Hey, who are you?" came a voice from the castle path. Roger Davis finally appeared, lugging a hefty wooden crate under one arm. He stepped forward, eyebrows raised in genuine puzzlement. Ron opened his mouth to answer. "I'm Ron Weasley, the one you were talking to when you asked about Harry." He stopped short, stunned. How could anyone at Hogwarts not recognize Ron Weasley? He blinked, searching Davis's face for a clue, but Davis's expression was blank. All at once, the stadium fell silent. Even the giant bubbles drifted still in the afternoon sun, as if holding their breath along with everyone else. Jay cut in. "Wait, I know. Rita Skeeter's article mentioned Ron Weasley. You two are really a couple, aren't you? Roger Davis shot Jay a sharp look. And you, he said, fixing his gaze on the tall blond boy, you must be Rocco Malfoy, judging by those anxious eyes. He turned to another student. But Slytherins aren't allowed in this session. It's top secret training. The dark-haired boy bristled. I'm Anthony Goldstein, Ravenclaw, he said flatly. I'm related to Tina Goldstein. She's married to Newt Scamander, the famous magizoologist. He spoke the words on autopilot. They'd been drilled into him so many times they were part of his identity now. Roger studied Anthony for a long moment, suspicion flickering across his face. Finally, he waved him forward. All right, you can stay. He swept his gaze over the rest of the group, as if ticking off a mental checklist. Rocco Malfoy, check. Terry Boot and Michael Corner, he noted their dark hair, check. And Neville Longbottom, he added with a nod. Everyone's here. Let's get started. I was curious to discover who might be the romantic rival of my favorite seeker, and I remembered that Ron had been badgering the ever-chatty sage for help writing a book, so I nearly missed what happened next. Hey, Davis. Harry Potter floated down from the sky and landed beside Roger Davis. Roger set the wooden crate on the ground and gave Harry a hearty clap on the shoulder, almost knocking him off balance. Oh, Harry, nearly forgot you were here. You flew brilliantly today. As Mrs. Huochi's pick, you're exactly what we need. For tonight, I'll run you through the rules, and then you'll be cleared to join the team's training 3 times a week. He turned to Ron and his friends with what sounded like a polite smile. All right, you lot. Harry's got his own coach now. Head to the auditorium and give us some space, won't you? Ron muttered a curse under his breath, and Anthony, still clearly miffed, herded the rest off to a front-row seat in the stands. Harry frowned. Isn't this all happening pretty fast? Roger's expression softened. Harry, you've got to understand. You're not like the others. You're a natural seeker. Your father's seeker's blood runs in your veins, Roger said, misreading Harry's pensive look. Since you're worried, let me explain our training regimen. He continued with confidence. Our first 2 practice sessions follow the class timetable. Outside those, we scout an unused classroom to devise tactics based on intel about the other college's Quidditch teams. Then every Friday at 7, we drill basic skills and review those tactics. Harry frowned. But Davis, shouldn't we be doing more? I asked Ron. Back when Charlie Weasley played Seeker for Gryffindor, they trained non-stop and ran laps for endurance. Roger's expression darkened with mild annoyance. Harry, you've got to understand, compared to the other 3 colleges, our greatest strength is our intellect. We can't match their brute power. We have to outthink them. A genius fights with genius strategies, he added, brushing off the topic. Sensing Roger's disinterest in continuing the debate, Harry dropped the subject. Ryan sat well away from the others, but with his abilities, distance posed no barrier to overhearing their talk. He smirked to himself. No surprise Ravenclaw's always been weak in the original timeline. Can't even hold a candle to Hufflepuff. All be and no bite. Chapter 142, Unreliable Roger. At precisely 7:15, Harry arrived at the makeshift training ground, but his enthusiasm was lukewarm. He had serious doubts about Roger's bold claims. Even if Roger Davis was as talented as he insisted, could a team riddled with infighting and led by a captain more fond of armchairs than brooms really stake a claim to any of the prestigious Quidditch Cups this year? Roger knelt beside a battered wooden crate and swung open its lid. Inside lay 4 balls, each a different size. Harry, let's skip the preamble. These are the 4 balls you need to know. He lifted a glossy football-sized sphere painted bright crimson. This, he said, is the quaffle. Our 3 chasers, Henry, Phoenix, and me, pass it back and forth, trying to send it through one of the opposing team's 3 rings. Every goal scores 10 points. Without pausing for Harry to take notes or ask questions, Roger swapped the quaffle for a heavy jet-black ball studded with gleaming metal. This is a bludger. Bewitched to fly on its own, it tries to knock players off their broomsticks. That's why each side has 2 beaters. Their job is to protect their teammates by deflecting these bludgers away. Harry scribbled in his notebook, struggling to keep pace. Were it not for Ron's earlier crash course in Quidditch basics, he might have been entirely lost. Roger reached to the back of the crate and produced a second bludger, identical to the first, before finally unveiling the smallest ball of all. He held it carefully between thumb and forefinger. "And this," he announced, "is the golden snitch. It flutters around at lightning speed, and the seeker who catches it earns 150 points and ends the match instantly." Harry watched the tiny golden sphere oscillate in Roger's palm, its silvery wings vibrating so fast they were almost invisible. Despite the clarity of Roger's demonstration, a swirl of doubt nagged at him. Could this fractured, captainless squad really pull together and win? As Roger tucked the balls back into the crate, Harry squared his shoulders. He was still uncertain about Roger's promises, but one thing was clear. If he wanted to find his place on this team, he'd have to be ready for whatever came next. They're all in 7th grade, with average flying skills. Your job as beaters is to protect your teammates from bludgers and send those bludgers toward the opposition. Roger stepped forward and, without laying them out on the pitch, produced 2 identical, gleaming black balls. He picked up a short wooden bat and held it out to Harry. "These are the bludgers," he explained. "Use this bat to knock them away from your team and smack them straight at the other side." Next, he reached behind him and lifted a bright, golden sphere smaller than the quaffle. It shone like a tiny sun in his hand. "This," he said, "is the golden snitch. It's the fastest of all the balls, nearly impossible to spot once it takes to the air. Your role as seeker is to catch the snitch, and watch out for opposing players trying to stop you. Catching it earns your team 150 points and immediately ends the match." Harry squinted at the winged ball, its silver wings fluttering almost too quickly to see. "So my main job is just dodging bludgers until I grab the snitch?" he asked, still sounding doubtful. Roger shook his head. "Partly, but there's more to it than that." "Don't expect them to play nice," Simon warned, glancing toward the Slytherin side of the pitch. "They'll body check you at every opportunity, just like Slytherin always does." He tossed the quaffle from hand to hand. "Remember, our real advantage lies in tactics. We'll go over everything in detail during tomorrow's strategy session, but here's a brief primer." Simon shifted on his broom and grinned at Harry. "After the seeker, so yes, Harry, that means you, the chasers are the heartbeat of our team. Roger and I, Bokov and myself, we focus on 2 signature moves, the Pokov technique and the inverted pass." He paused to let it sink in. The Pokov technique takes its name from Petrova Pokov, a legendary Russian chaser. One of us flies high with the quaffle, enough to draw an opponent into thinking we're lining up for a shot. Then, at the last second, we loft the ball straight down to a teammate waiting below. Accuracy is everything. I pride myself on it, but I'll admit Henry doesn't always manage to catch my passes. Simon winked. Then there's the inverted pass. You hurl the quaffle from your shoulder over your back to a teammate flying right behind you. It's awkward to defend against, especially for Phoenix. He never sees it coming. More often than not, it turns into an easy goal. He flicked the quaffle into the air and caught it with one hand. "All right, that's enough theory for now. Go enjoy your practice, Harry. I won't keep you any longer." Roger slammed the wooden crate shut, hoisted it onto his shoulder, and turned away. "You lot can keep playing here with your friends. I'm off." His irritation was obvious. Harry watched him go, confused, but managed only a reluctant nod. "Harry, is that it?" Ron called after him, disbelief plain in his voice. "Even if he swears off training with the snitch, he still ought to practice with the other balls, right?" Harry let out a short, mocking laugh, slipping effortlessly into Davis's clipped tone. "According to Roger, we're all geniuses, and geniuses only need to know the rules. Once you've got the rules down, you just have to come up with genius tactics." Anthony bristled. "Well, I asked him why Ravenclaw has never won the Quidditch Cup," he snapped indignantly. Hermione stepped forward and handed Harry the tiny golf ball that Ryan had transfigured. "Here, Harry." Neville caught it in his palm and nodded. "Then it's settled. We'll train ourselves." For the rest of the afternoon, Neville, Ron, Anthony, and the others took turns flinging the ball into unpredictable loops and spirals. Harry mounted his Nimbus 2000 and climbed into the sky, striking each shot with flawless precision. They didn't stop until dusk settled in shades of violet and gold. Only then did they finally call their makeshift practice to an end. On the walk back to campus, everyone except Hermione Lane was drenched in sweat, but their spirits were high. Anthony turned to Harry with bright eyes. "You were amazing up there on your Nimbus 2000. If you can snag the golden snitch as quickly as you did today, it won't matter how the rest of us play. The Quidditch Cup is ours for the taking." Ron opened his mouth to agree, but exhaustion from the training session caught up with him, and all he could manage was a weary nod, just like the rest of the group. Only Ryan trailed behind with a skeptical frown. He'd heard the praise for the Seeker's role, and it was easy to assume that the rest of the team hardly mattered. In many people's minds, once Harry Potter was in the air on that broom, Gryffindor's victory was a foregone conclusion. Ryan knew better, though. No championship is won by a single player, no matter how legendary. It was Fred and George Weasley who expertly deflected bludgers, keeping Harry safe. It was coordinated passing between chasers that set up scoring opportunities. Quidditch was a team sport through and through. Even on Ravenclaw's side, the star seeker Henry had already pulled down 3 snitches this season. Yet his smug confidence was built on the backs of 2 underclassmen, Roger and Phoenix, whose contributions he blatantly dismissed. Ryan shook his head. He'd seen firsthand how every position mattered. And as proud as Anthony and the others were of Harry's talent, Ryan suspected it would take more than one seeker to secure a cup. Chapter 7. The underdog's Phoenix had been a loyal Nimbus supporter ever since his first glimpse of the team soaring across the sky. He cheered every chaser's goal, roared for every spectacular save, and despised Roger Davis, captain of the rival sweep squad, with every fiber of his being. To Phoenix, Roger was all flash and no substance, a man who lived for the limelight, not the game. When Roger addressed his seeker, Ace Harry, or his pack of assers and beaters, he never bothered to use real names. They were mere extras in his personal narrative, performative props to bolster his own legend. Even worse, he never once acknowledged his goalkeeper's contributions, the very player responsible for keeping the quaffle out of his net. In Phoenix's eyes, that goalkeeper was the second most critical figure on any team, right behind the seeker. Phoenix thought of Aidan Wood, captain and keeper of Gryffindor, a stalwart leader who commanded respect with every fingertip save. When his chasers faltered, Wood held the line. When his seeker faltered, Wood's steady presence kept the team in the match. That, Phoenix knew, was true leadership. Roger Davis, by contrast, was notoriously unreliable. Sure, he could deliver a stirring pep talk, weaving flawless third-person pronouns he, she, they into every sentence as if scripting a theatrical grand finale. But on the pitch, he was sloppy. His blocks were half-hearted, his passes erratic. And whenever his brashness backfired, he was quick to shift blame onto teammates. My beaters didn't hit hard enough, or my chasers missed the pass. Phoenix had heard rumors of Sweep's endless combat drills, wild scrimmages meant to toughen the players. Yet Roger never called a real tactical meeting. No breakdown of opponent strengths, no rehearsed plays, no cohesive game plan, just improvisation and bravado. From his friend Ryan's perspective, Sweep's fate was already sealed. With a captain who craved applause more than victory, and a team too undisciplined to execute even the simplest strategies, they didn't stand a chance against Nimbus, or for that matter, against Gryffindor. Packing up his scarf and broom, Phoenix smiled to himself. Let Roger Davis bask in his empty triumphs. When the whistle blew, the true heroes, the unstoppable seekers, the tenacious chasers, the impenetrable keepers, would make all the noise that mattered. And in that moment, Roger's hollow words would be drowned out by the roar of a real victory. Even Ryan, hardly a die-hard Quidditch fan, couldn't resist racking his precious mortal brain over this and grumbling. To him, the only reasons Roger Davis had become the captain's backup were his keen strategic mind, his gift for gab, and let's be honest, his boyish good looks. It left Ryan utterly speechless. Chapter 143. A life as calm as water time seemed to slip by faster than Harry expected. Before he realized it, more than a month had passed, and it was already October 29th. During these weeks, Harry Potter had experienced a rare stretch of peace. Professor Quirrell, despite looking paler and sicker by the day, had remained impeccably well-behaved in class. Dudley Dursley, now the celebrated captain of the Hufflepuff Quidditch team, had bound himself by some unspoken code of conduct, and never so much as grumbled at Harry. Even Draco Malfoy, once Harry's staunchest rival, had mellowed into a quiet acquaintance. They exchanged only the necessary pleasantries, no more. Harry suspected much of this newfound calm owed to Lucius Malfoy's insistence on maintaining appearances, and perhaps also to the absence of new exposés from Rita Skeeter, who'd quietly abandoned her usual scandal sheets. On his quietest days, Harry couldn't help but feel that all the upheaval of the past year existed only in a dream. His friend Ron Weasley, ever the opposite of demure, still yearned for attention and excitement. Harry had discovered the perfect antidote to Ron's restless energy: flattery. Whenever Ron began fidgeting or dropping hints about some brilliant idea, Harry would beam at him and say, "Hey Ron, I've heard you're incredible at Quidditch. Mind teaching me a few tricks?" Almost instantly, Ron's bragging fit would transform into an enthusiastic coaching session, his urge to shine sated, at least for the time being. So Harry drifted through October with surprising ease. Classes were routine, the corridors were calm, and even the owls in the Great Hall seemed to hoot more softly. For once, he could almost savor what felt like an ordinary term at Hogwarts, quiet enough that he could hardly believe it was real. Harry had finally stumbled on a universal solution to calm Ron's impulsive streak: chess. It turned out Ron was a natural. Whenever Ron felt the urge to do something reckless, Harry would analyze his board, claiming that his knight's position proved Ron was thinking rashly, and then lavish him with compliments, promising he'd never actually go through with his plan. It wasn't exactly a wise tactic, but it neutralized Ron, one of the biggest fuses threatening the peace in Harry's life. Still, peace didn't mean progress. Since Harry became the school's seeker, Professor Snape had refused to so much as praise him in potions class. Snape's grudge went back to Harry's father, also a seeker, who had once enraged Voldemort and indirectly caused Snape's mother's death. Harry suspected that, had he not spent those few weeks training in Atlantis, Snape wouldn't even have cracked a grudging smirk his way. And that wasn't the worst blow to his confidence. It was Roger Davis's coaching methods and those so-called tactical seminars that really shook Harry. He'd always known he was a prodigy. Ron admitted that only his brother Charlie came close. But now he wasn't so sure he could truly stand on his own. Harry's heart sank at the thought. If he failed now, Roger would have every excuse to call him a loser, someone who didn't pull his weight in the plan. Yet, oddly enough, that worry was the least of his troubles. For weeks, Ryan had simply disappeared. Every time Harry carved out a moment to return to Atlantis, Ryan vanished, leaving him no chance to go back. What Harry didn't realize was that Ryan hadn't been dodging him out of malice. Instead, Ryan had thrown himself into a far bigger mystery, finding the hidden route to Moon City. All of Ryan's divinations and magical scans pointed to one astonishing conclusion: the city floated on the moon. But inexplicably, no portal would carry him there. Even more puzzling was that Moon City seemed to have no true level 6 wizards in residence. Ryan was certain of this because any wizard of that rank leaves a vivid, untraceable scrubbed signature on his magical vision, an indelible mark of power. Such wizards are rare. Level 7 adepts, known as the reserves of the gods, are practically immortal. You can't attain genuine 6th level status simply by mastering 1 or 2 potent spells. Those are tricks any seasoned magician might learn. Officially recognized level 6 wizards are extraordinary beings, and according to every scrap of magic Ryan had unearthed, none resided in Moon City. Chapter X: Echoes of the Moon. Ryan sat alone in the observatory's soft lamplight, turning over the latest reports on underwater sorcery. Among the merfolk's secretive order, only a handful had ever achieved level 6. Amelia Burns's famed all-around shield spells were rated level 6, matching the talents of Flitwick, Snape, and Mag. At this rarefied tier, magic transcended ordinary spellwork. It reshaped life itself. If Voldemort's transformation into a near-immortal entity qualified as a level 6 feat, then Dumbledore's accomplishment stood in a category all its own. He hadn't relied on dark rituals or forbidden tomes. He'd drawn power from pure concept, philosophical insight, fused with the force he called love. The result shattered every precedent in magical theory. Against such cosmic power, the enchanters of Moon City ought to be helpless. Yet as Ryan pondered their strength, he realized they too had tapped into a hidden principle, the moon's own essence. By synchronizing their wills, they'd forged their magic into a single, shared framework, a communal concept eerily reminiscent of Atlantis, where sorcery sprang from harmony rather than individual mastery. Atlantis had used its power in peaceful communion, Moon City in secretive unison. Ryan couldn't shake the suspicion that they'd borrowed heavily from Professor Smith's lost research logs. Distance, it turned out, worked in their favor. Perched on the lunar surface and severed from Earth's familiar ley lines, their collective power coalesced in ways that narrowed any advantage Ryan once held. Their remote fortress had become both shield and amplifier, closing the gap between challenger and champion. Yet despite these revelations, Ryan found himself curiously idle. He spent his days escorting Penelope and Kate through hidden corridors, efforts more aimed at repairing friendships than sparring with lunar mages. He realized, with a start, that he hadn't visited Harry in the Gryffindor common room for what felt like ages. Somewhere between cosmic breakthroughs and interstellar politics, his own ambition had slipped away, paused, as if he were waiting for someone else to pull the next lever of fate. Ryan Potter's life had become almost absurdly tranquil, far more so than anyone would have expected after he'd missed his intended landing in Moon City. Even the annual encounter with Dudley Dursley was uneventful. How dare Dudley act as though he were the better person? Ryan had originally given Harry the gift of magic, partly to study him, but mostly to add a little excitement to his own humdrum days. In retrospect, he sometimes regretted having drawn the sorting hat toward Ravenclaw. If Harry had been placed in Gryffindor, he'd be sneaking out after curfew every night, getting tangled in Ryan's elaborate pranks, and driving the house elves and prefects mad, earning a steady trickle of lost points for Gryffindor. Now that would have been entertaining. Instead, Harry floated through his classes with scholarly ease, and even young Ron Weasley proved surprisingly pliable. Ron had promised to commission that chatty old seer, Sage Marwood, was it, to ghostwrite his memoirs, and Ryan fully intended to back the project himself. He'd even planned to distribute the resulting book through Smith's exclusive publishing channels, no matter the cost. After all, Ryan was flush once again. A few galleons here and there wouldn't hurt. Still, none of it was thrilling. Ryan sat in his study, absently running his fingers through his thick, unruly hair. Not a single strand came loose. He was far too robust for a dramatic hair-pulling moment. It struck him as a perfect metaphor for his life these days. Too strong, too secure, too unremarkable. The real headache, he decided, lay on the horizon. Halloween was fast approaching, and with it the chance for something, anything, to shatter this stifling calm. Because if the season's festivities didn't deliver a little chaos, Ryan wasn't sure what would. Kate and Penelope took this holiday very seriously, spending hours planning and decorating for every activity. The moment you stepped outside, the sweet, smoky scent of roasted pumpkin was everywhere, which unfortunately for Ryan stirred up an old, unpleasant memory. In his previous life, his brother's favorite dish had been pumpkin rice. Not the steamy juice or sweet soup that Ryan enjoyed, but that gooey, mixed-in-the-grains monstrosity. As a child, he'd been the only one at the dinner table who loathed it, picking around the pumpkin chunks until his plate was bare. Now, the smell of roasting pumpkins felt almost identical, and Ryan pinched the bridge of his nose, trying to block out the aroma. While he fought off that nausea, his mind raced with something far more urgent. Right, he reminded himself under his breath. Quirrell's planning to release a troll on Halloween, just 2 days away. It was the perfect diversion. With everyone distracted by screams and chaos in the corridors, no one would notice Quirrell slipping into the forbidden third-floor corridor to seize the Philosopher's Stone. Halloween itself would be a disaster, and yet the culprit would emerge from the chaos-carrying presence, as if to say, "Surprise!" If Quirrell had any taste for theatrics, he might even stage another shock for Harry. Ryan's stomach fluttered with dread at the thought. Everyone gets the Halloween they deserve. Everyone except Snape, of course. He's bound to end up with a dog bite. Halloween is fantastic, Ryan said, his eyes bright with anticipation. Chapter 44. The Hidden Giant Monster, October 30th. The day before Halloween dawned crisp and bright over Hogwarts. In the first period History of Magic lecture, Professor Binns droned on about Hangis of Woodcroft, a noted alumnus of Hufflepuff House. According to Binns, Hangus once lived in what later became the Three Broomsticks, until local muggles drove him away. Determined not to be chased off again, he founded a hidden village exclusively for witches and wizards. Ironically, as the years passed, Slytherin families gradually outnumbered every other house there, and contact with the non-magical world all but disappeared. Harry glanced at Draco Malfoy, seated a few rows ahead. The Malfoys had always done well by muggles, quite the opposite of the anti-muggle sentiments common among the village's pure-blood residents. "I never understood that," Harry muttered to Hermione, who just shrugged. Even the Blacks, neighbors to a muggle settlement, refused to have anything to do with them. But prejudice often needs no reason. After lunch, the students filed into Professor Flitwick's charms classroom. As head of Ravenclaw, Flitwick beamed at his eager charges. "Today, we'll begin making objects fly, combining the Levioso and locomotor charms to master true levitation." He demonstrated by sending a feather dancing across the air. Then, wands at the ready, each student practiced the Wingardium Leviosa motion, swish, flick, and the incantation clear on their lips. Slowly, book covers and quills lifted off desks, hovering as beacons of the charm's power. Harry had no trouble lifting his oversized History of Magic tome. But when he glanced out the window toward the Forbidden Forest, an odd chill ran down his spine. Little did he know, something far larger and far older than any school charm lurked just beyond those trees, waiting to reveal itself on Halloween night. Professor Flitwick had promised that by Halloween, every first year would have mastered the levitation charm. In theory, they shouldn't let themselves get too excited, but after watching Neville's toads float lazily around the classroom, everyone was itching to try it for themselves. Even Ryan found his curiosity sparked. He'd never have guessed he'd be this eager to wave a wand. He glanced at Hermione. She was her usual, utterly unflappable self, precisely the sort of person you wouldn't expect to blurt out corrections or hide away crying in a bathroom. Yet something in the air hinted that today might be different. Ryan shook his head. Stranger things had happened at Hogwarts, and he was about to witness one. "Right, settle into pairs," Professor Flitwick chirped, perching on his customary pile of books. "Harry with Ron. Ryan, you're with Miss Granger." He beamed, then adopted a more serious tone. "Remember that subtle wrist movement we've been practicing? One swish, one flick. Don't overdo it, and pronounce the incantation clearly, Wingardium Leviosa. No slurring or muddling, or you'll end up like Baruffio, who said Leviosa instead of Leviosa, and wound up flat on his back with a rather disgruntled bison grazing on his chest." Ryan raised an eyebrow at Hermione, who simply tucked a stray curl behind her ear and gave him a reassuring nod. He drew in a breath, tightened his grip on his wand, and prepared to give the charm his very best shot. First-year charms was always one of the trickiest classes for budding wizards, and today's lesson, the levitation charm, was no exception. Professor Flitwick swept into the chamber, bell in hand, and set the row of desks before him. On each desk lay a single white feather, waiting for its spell. Harry Potter, had already previewed these incantations during his strange voyage to Atlantis, and since his return he'd mastered nearly every first-year charm. He tapped his wand, whispered the words with calm precision, and the feather quivered before lifting into the air, spinning gently above his desk. Hermione followed almost at once, her movements sure and her pronunciation flawless. Flitwick a kindly instructor, merely pretended not to watch too closely, nodding to himself with quiet satisfaction. He believed in letting effort earn the grade, nothing like Snape's habit of handing out favors. Ron Weasley, by contrast, was having the time of his life. If by having the time of his life you mean flicking and swishing his wand in ever-wilder arcs while the feather stubbornly refused to budge. "Wingardium Leviosa!" he barked, his long arms rotating like windmills. The other students exchanged sympathetic looks. Hermione leaned over, gently placing a hand on his wrist. "Ron, you're rushing. It's Wingardium Leviosa. Slow your swish and flick." Harry offered him a grin. "Come on, Ron. You're Ron Weasley, the chess master of the wizarding world. You've got this." Taking a deep breath, Ron steadied his stance. He cleared his throat, carefully corrected his pronunciation, and focused on the tip of his wand. At once, the feather gave a soft shiver, then floated upward, wobbling prettily before settling in midair. A ripple of applause ran through the classroom. Professor Flitwick allowed himself a small, proud smile as Ron beamed. First-year charms had claimed another victory. "Remember," Professor Flitwick reminded in his high, cheery voice, "you must enunciate every syllable of Wingardium Leviosa, especially stretching out the Leviosa." Ron's face went a shade paler. Right. I'm just a bit nervous. I never really practiced charms during the week. I've been brushing up on Quidditch tactics for you instead, Harry." He forced a casual shrug, an excuse he'd used so often that he almost believed it himself. After all, his magical skill wasn't terrible, and Harry's little pranks had given him an unearned boost of confidence. With a sharp breath, Ron rolled up his sleeves, flicked his wand decisively, and declared, "Wingardium Leviosa." The feather on the desk quivered, then floated serenely about 4 feet into the air. "Excellent!" Professor Flitwick's eyes lit up behind his spectacles. He clapped his hands so vigorously his robes billowed. "Mr. Weasley, brilliant work!" He bounded up and down, delight written all over him. 2 points to Ravenclaw. Ron shot Harry an exasperated look and tugged at his arm. "Stop cheering, Harry. I did it ages ago." Harry only grinned. "Every time, Ron. Flitwick's just dying to hand out points this term." "Actually," Ron muttered as he joined Harry at the back of the room, "I meant pretentious. He's always so eager to please, unlike your favorite Slytherin professor, I suppose." "Why does he keep finding excuses to award extra points to his own house?" Ron muttered, scowling across the great hall. "If I were Professor Flitwick," Harry shrugged, "I'd probably hand them out all the time." Ryan, seated quietly at the edge of the Gryffindor table, couldn't suppress a smile. These small in-world variations were unexpectedly entertaining. Still, could the tale of Harry Potter really skip the famous troll incident? In the original timeline, he'd have spirited Hermione away before the creature's arrival and watched Harry's showdown from a safe distance. But this Quirrell, it seemed, had released the troll just before the Halloween feast on October 31st. That single act had severed the magical red thread tying Harry's fate to the monsters. Ryan didn't object. Playing Secret Guardian, the Moon, as he liked to think, was perfectly honorable. After all, helping others was a virtue he cherished. Besides, he couldn't very well leave Ron hanging, or forget about Draco Malfoy's inevitable role in tonight's chaos. Thursday, October 31st, dawned crisp and overcast. By midday, the Defense Against the Dark Arts office on Hogwarts' 4th floor, now converted into a classroom after Professor Quirrell's departure, gleamed. Every desk was aligned with precision, every surface shone as if freshly polished. Ryan slipped through a shimmering portal and materialized beside a low shelf. There, tucked in the corner, sat a small box secured by 7 intricate locks, each ward pulsing with protect, enchantments. He placed a hand on the cool wood, heart thrumming with anticipation. Soon, the real Halloween spectacle would begin, and this time, he would ensure it unfolded safely, but no less memorably. The heavy iron box before Ryan had a storied and sinister history. Barty Crouch Jr. had once used it to stow away Mad-Eye Moody under the Imperius Curse, and its 7 locks alluded to Voldemort's obsession with that number. After all, he himself had created 7 Horcruxes. No ordinary trunk, it required all 7 keys to be opened layer by layer. Although Ryan could have simply summoned it with a spell, he preferred a more tactile approach. He hovered his wand over the floating chain of locks, and one by one, like iron petals unfolding, 7 shining keys materialized in his palm. Key 1 clicked into place. He turned it, and the lid creaked open. Inside lay a neat stack of spellbooks, treatises on transfiguration, defensive charms, and obscure counter-curses. He shut it again, extracted the second key, and released the next lock. This time, the box held a selection of potions designed for bodily regeneration, silvery draughts that shimmered with latent power, alongside fresh sheets of parchment, quills, and a pitch-black cloak woven to mask magical signatures. Ryan's mind raced back to Quirrell's daring raid on Gringotts and that grim ride into the Forbidden Forest to slaughter unicorns. No doubt this was the very garment he'd worn. One by one, Ryan worked through the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th keys. Each lock revealed something new, a different array of arcane artifacts, handwritten scrolls, finely wrought instruments for divination. With every turn, the box seemed to shift its contents, guarding its deepest secret until the final key was used. He finally slid the 7th key into the lock and lifted the heavy lid. Inside, a 12-foot-tall giant lay curled up, its waxy, dull skin stretched tight over massive limbs. A thick wooden club rested beside it, and a rancid stench filled the cramped chamber. "Found you," Ryan murmured, a triumphant smile tugging at his lips. Chapter 145, Broken Friendship. By 4 o'clock, Professor Quirrell was conducting his Defense Against the Dark Arts lesson in a high-ceilinged classroom on the 3rd floor of Hogwarts Castle. Today's special guest was Draco Malfoy, who, along with Crabbe and Goyle, perched smugly in the back row. Across the room, Ryan's gaze locked onto the hulking figure slumped in a chair. The stench was unbearable, and Ryan was certain this creature was the true source of Quirrell's foul odor. He was a grotesque sight, skin the color of granite, a colossal, rock-like body, and a tiny, bald head that looked almost like a coconut balanced on his shoulders. 2 oversized ears jutted up like warped bat wings. His arms dangled far below his waist, his legs were stubby and thick as tree trunks, and his broad, calloused feet seemed ready to crack the floorboards. Ryan straightened, lips curling as he uttered a string of frosty words. Substantial runes, shimmering with cold energy, sprang from his mouth and slammed into the sleeping brute, binding him fast. Satisfied, Ryan closed a small, enchanted box that had appeared at his side as if summoned by his very thoughts. "Villain secured," he mused silently. "Now, for our second female lead, the arrogant golden retriever." At that moment, the lesson proper began. Professor Quirrell strode to the front of the room, wand in hand, and Draco wrinkled his nose in contempt. "Blasted Quirrell," he hissed under his breath. "I can't stand this stench. I'm telling Father." Crabbe and Goyle exchanged glances, but remained silent, no longer eager to curry favor with their self-important peer. The bonds of their friendship, once as solid as rock, were already beginning to crack. It had been nearly a month since Draco Malfoy disappeared on them without a word, just vanished one afternoon, and left Gregory Goyle and Vincent Crabbe to wrangle with Dudley Dursley's latest tantrum. In that time, something even more astonishing happened. Draco had struck up a friendship with Harry Potter. Harry Potter, the very boy whose name had been off-limits at Malfoy Manor for as long as Goyle and Crabbe could remember. Needless to say, Goyle and Crabbe felt more abandoned than ever. All their lives, they'd called Draco by nicknames, Dre, Malfoykin, while he always referred to them simply as Greg and Vinny, back when he even bothered to speak to them. Now he reserved every ounce of his attention for Potter, greeting Harry with that sly, patronizing Potter that sent shivers down their spines. Still, neither Goyle nor Crabbe had the nerve to drop him. Their family's ties to the Malfoys were too strong. Any break in that alliance would spell social and possibly financial disaster. Besides, Mrs. Malfoy had taken to sending trays of sweets up to their dormitory every week. You don't say no to free candy, especially when it's drizzled in almond toffee and dusted with fairy sugar. Today, as Professor Lupin demonstrated a particularly tricky defensive charm, Draco glanced over his shoulder and caught Goyle and Crabbe quietly munching away on caramel frogs. He raised an eyebrow, half amused. Though they'd drifted out of his daily life, their silhouettes, loyal as ever, still trailed him like silent sentinels. And for now, at least, that was enough to remind him that true alliances can't be broken by a little Potter fever. Professor Quirrell reeked of mildew and garlic, like a pair of socks long forgotten at the bottom of a trunk. Draco Malfoy wrinkled his nose but forced himself to finish the last bite of his treacle tart. Across the table, Vincent Crabbe suddenly went silent. A violent gurgle from Crabbe's stomach echoed around the Charms classroom, halting everyone mid-spoonful. "What's the matter?" Draco drawled. "Did you forget it's Halloween? Save some room for the banquet tonight." Crabbe doubled over, clutching his abdomen. Gregory Goyle set his half-eaten chocolate frog on the desk, concern written all over his face. With a final groan, Crabbe bolted from the room and didn't return for the rest of the lesson. When the final bell rang, Draco and Goyle followed the stream of students down to the Great Hall. Pumpkins hovered above the long tables, each brimming with roast potatoes, candied yams, and plates of delicate fancies. But Crabbe's usual seat among the Slytherins remained empty. Leaning by the punch cauldron, Seamus Finnegan was deep in conversation with Dean Thomas. Draco overheard Seamus's disgusted whisper. The lavatory where Crabbe rushed off to must have been chaos. I heard that toilet's been running non-stop for nearly half an hour. Dean nodded. Something fierce was going on in there. Gregory blinked. Why didn't he just head back to the common room? That's only one flight up? Draco smirked. Because he couldn't stomach another bite with Quirrell's stench in the air. Crabbe was starved till his own stomach turned on him. Goyle simply nodded, looking innocent. As laughter and chatter swelled around them, Draco turned back to the glittering feast. Halloween at Hogwarts had arrived, complete with ghostly lanterns overhead, bubbling punch, and the unwelcome reminder that no banquet, no matter how grand, can survive a desperate case of, well, you know. They stepped into the restaurant, and for a moment forgot all about Crabbe. The room was alight with Halloween decorations. Hundreds of jet-black bats fluttered from walls and ceiling, and a swirling cloud of paper bats drifted low over every table, their silent wings making the candlelight in the hollowed-out pumpkins dance. At once, gleaming golden platters appeared, heaped with steaming dishes that recalled the grand welcome feast at the start of term. Draco Malfoy was about to pop a meatball into his mouth when Professor Quirrell burst through the door, his voluminous scarf tumbling off his head. His face was ashen, eyes wide with panic. He staggered to Dumbledore's chair, gripped the edge of the table, and gasped, "There's a troll in the underground classroom. I thought you should know." Before he could say more, he slumped to the floor, unconscious. Pandemonium erupted. Shouts and clattering chairs filled the air as students backed away in alarm. At last, Professor Dumbledore stepped forward and tapped his wand sharply. With a crackle of purple sparks that echoed around the room, he restored silence, every eye fixed on him as he prepared to face this new, dangerous threat. "Prefects," he whispered, his voice low but urgent, "escort your houses to the dormitories immediately." Under their prefect's guidance, Ravenclaw and Gryffindor students hurried up the stairwells. Meanwhile, in the castle's depths, Slytherin and Hufflepuff prefects, joined by a few wary professors, led their houses back toward the Slytherin common room, a dank, torchlit dungeon notorious for rumors of lurking trolls. Draco Malfoy scowled as he followed. "Why on earth do we have to live underground? I swear, if I run into a troll—" He glanced up the corridor, panic stirring. "Crabbe!" He stopped short. Of course, Goyle was still in the bathroom, blissfully unaware of the danger. Draco took a step forward. "I'm going back to find him." "Don't." Vincent Crabbe's voice was firm, so firm Draco realized he'd never heard it before. "He's on the 5th floor. It's too dangerous." Draco opened his mouth to argue, but Crabbe cut him off. "That's enough, Malfoy. You've never really considered Vincent and me your friends. Last time you left us alone with that troll, and now you'd abandon him too, just to hide down here with all your followers." Draco Malfoy's silver robes fluttered as he cut across the crowded hallway. He caught up with Gregory Goyle, who was lingering a pace behind and looking distinctly uneasy. "Come on," Draco muttered, brushing a lock of pale hair from his eyes. "I'm not asking you to do anything too terrible." Goyle straightened. "Then tell me your name," he shot back. "Not just Malfoy, your full name, like Potter's is Harry Potter." Draco blinked. "What, my full name?" Goyle folded his arms. "Yes. What do you call yourself exactly?" Draco stared at him, for a long moment, baffled. Goyle's lip curled in a triumphant sneer. "Fine," Draco said at last, voice tight. "It's Draco Lucius Malfoy. Are you happy?" With another contemptuous snort, Goyle spun on his heel and vanished into the milling students. Draco watched him go, expression vacant, then shook himself free of the encounter and hurried off, up the corridor and toward the 5th floor, leaving the rest of his group to head down to the dungeons. On the main staircase below, Harry, Ron, and Hermione were jostled by a tide of terrified Hufflepuffs spilling from the upper floors. Someone screamed that a troll was on the loose in the dungeon. Harry grabbed Ron's arm and pulled him toward the west wing. "Hurry," he urged. "Look!" Ron gasped as they squeezed past a cluster of first-years. "Is that Malfoy?" Harry followed his gaze. Malfoy's pale head bobbed ahead of them, heading upward, away from the turmoil. "What's he doing going up?" Harry muttered. Ron shrugged. "Troll in the dungeon, probably smarter to get away from it." Harry's jaw tightened. "No, look who's with him." He pointed, and Ron's eyes widened as he spotted the hulking shape of Vincent Crabbe at Malfoy's side. Great, Ron groaned. Crab, of course. Hermione caught up, her face pale. We should. Harry shook his head, not taking his eyes off the empty corridor Malfoy and Crabbe had slipped into. We'll deal with the troll, he said quietly, but I'm going after Malfoy first. And without another word, he turned away from the crowds and raced up the stairs in pursuit of the blonde duo. Harry frowned at the empty high table. He's not at the Halloween feast tonight. It must be because of that. Ron leaned closer, voice low. And with all the teachers down in the dungeons, there's no one left to warn. Harry's stomach lurched. A troll's a living creature, not a wooden prop. It could lunge at any moment. Exactly, Ron said, pressing a hand to Harry's arm. But we can't let Prefect Crivet catch us skulking about. Anthony, if anyone asks where Harry is, just tell them we've already returned to the common room. With that, they merged into the crowd of Hufflepuffs and slipped off in the opposite direction. Chapter 1146. The giant monster on the 5th floor, 6:30 p.m., the 5th floor of Hogwarts Castle. Ryan blinked into existence in a deserted corridor, pausing to admire the shifting glow of torchlight on ancient stone walls. In the original timeline, Professor Quirrell had locked the troll in the dungeons, but somehow it had clawed its way up to the second-floor girls' bathroom. Remarkably, no one noticed. The Halloween feast was in full roar, every table piled high with food, every student caught up in the excitement and noise. Tonight, however, Ryan had taken no chances. He'd tweaked his enchantment so the troll could still rampage, but never land a fatal blow. At worst, it might break a bone or two, enough to send a careless student to the infirmary for a night without causing a tragic death. He'd also reprogrammed the creature's primitive mind. A single thought pulsed in its head: climb to the 5th-floor boys' bathroom. And once it reached that landing, the directive would vanish, leaving the troll happily squatting in its new domain. There, Ryan had prepared an entire stage, complete with enchanted seating and illusions, ready for his private theatrics. So far, the plan had gone off without a hitch. Despite its bulk and bellows, the troll had slipped upward unnoticed. Now that it stood on the 5th floor, Ryan didn't need to guide it any longer. He stepped back into the shadow of a nearby alcove, heart steady, as the massive creature lumbered forward. In a few moments, the real show would begin. The dankest stench in Hogwarts, that unmistakable, overpowering funk of a centuries-old boys' loo, proved the perfect bait for the trolls burbling around the dungeons. Unfortunately for Draco Malfoy, he'd forgotten one crucial thing in all the chaos. Vincent Crabbe needed a countercharm to keep from fainting dead away. Meanwhile, Crabbe was locked inside the lavatory, stomach churning so violently that he gripped the rim of the toilet as cold sweat ran down his face. He'd been feeling queasy ever since Defense Against the Dark Arts earlier that afternoon, and now the moment of reckoning had come. A loud rap on the door startled him. "Crabbe, are you in there?" Goyle's voice was tight with urgency. "I'm here," Crabbe gasped, voice weak. "Did you and Malfoy bring me? Lunch or something?" He wiped his clammy palm on his trousers, relieved that his stomach had finally calmed long enough to clear the bowl. Now all he had to do was stand up and get dressed. "Forget food," Goyle pounded again. "There are trolls in the basement, and Malfoy's using this horrific smell to lure them away. We're heading for the 5th-floor stairwell. Meet us there. Move it, Crabbe." Crabbe tried to push himself to his feet, knees buckling. "I can't stand." Up on the 5th floor, Draco rounded the corner, wand at the ready, and was hit by a wall of noxious odor so vile it nearly knocked him out cold. He staggered, hand pressed against his mouth, then forced himself to take a deliberate breath. This was the very same stench Crabbe had been griping about all afternoon. Draco squared his shoulders. If he could just hold on a little longer, they might yet make it out without a single troll noticing their escape. He raised his wand. "Stay with me, Crabbe," he whispered. "Help is on the way." Harry's heart sank. It couldn't be anything good. Sure enough, a troll was lumbering toward the bathroom. From around the corner on the 4th floor, Ron crept up beside him and whispered, "Do you smell that?" Harry inhaled sharply. The stench hit him like a curse, a foul blend of rotting socks and a public loo no one had cleaned in years. A low grunt rumbled through the corridor, followed by the thud of massive feet dragging across the stone. Ron peered down the hallway. "Look," he hissed. In the dim moonlight, pooling at the far end, a hulking shape shuffled closer. They pressed themselves into the shadows as the troll stepped fully into view. "It's headed for the 5th floor," Harry breathed, voice shaking. "That's where Malfoy went." Ron tried to sound brash, but his teeth chattered anyway. Maybe someone, some wizard who hates the Death Eaters and even their own kin, sent it after him. Harry's eyes narrowed. Or maybe it's just after somewhere nice and smelly to mess up. The bathroom's right here, and the key's still in the lock. We can trap it inside. They watched anxiously as the troll paused at the bathroom door, braced itself, and peered in. Dobby twitched his long ears, made up his little mind, then ducked down and slipped into the room. "Harry, you're incredible," Ron began, but caught himself mid-sentence as he remembered their plan. They pressed themselves flat against the wall and edged toward the open door, hearts pounding, praying the troll wouldn't come lumbering out at any moment. With a sudden lunge, Harry snatched the key from the lock, slammed the door shut, and twisted it until it clicked. "Got it!" Their faces flushed with excitement at their success. Without a word, they sprinted back down the corridor. Harry grabbed Ron's arm. "Hold on. Think about the bathroom incident, Crabbe disappearing, Malfoy acting so weird." Ron's eyes widened. "You're saying Crabbe and Malfoy are here, right now?" Across the hall, Crabbe finally staggered to his feet and pushed the door open. He clung to Goyle's arm and panted, "Where's Draco?" Goyle shook his head gloomily. "He's probably holed up in the common room again, just like last time, leaving us to deal with the Dursleys on our own." Draco's voice cut through the corridor's hush. "Gregory, what are you going on about? Vincent, what's that smell on you? No, we have to get out of here now." He spun to find Crabbe and Goyle frozen in place. At first, Gregory Goyle balked. "But can't we just hide here?" "Hide?" Draco snapped. "No time. Move." He grabbed both of them by the collars and started pulling. Crabbe stumbled, his face draining of color. The terrible stench clung to him, growing fouler with every step, like a cloud of dung bombs. Draco suspected he knew exactly what caused it. With urgency driving him, he yanked them into the nearest bathroom. Sliding the door shut behind them, he beckoned them into the far corner and held up a finger. Goyle and Crabbe, usually slow on the uptake, fell silent instantly. Draco exhaled, relief flooding him. He was grateful he'd steered clear of the cubicle Crabbe had used earlier that afternoon. Now, if only they could stay quiet long enough, they might just slip away without drawing more attention, and without getting any closer to whatever foul concoction Vincent Crabbe had brought along. The fetid odor wasn't just ordinary sewer stench, it reeked of dung bombs. "Troll!" Heavy footsteps thundered ever closer. "Duck!" Draco Malfoy snarled, and Goyle and Crabbe collapsed flat to the floor. Not that they strictly needed to obey. Ryan's spell would have frozen the troll's swing in midair. A length of wood rasped against Crabbe's hair as the flimsy partitions of the bathroom stalls splintered. From shattered pipes above, a pale yellow spray of sewage hissed down. Malfoy curled into a roll and landed deftly on his feet, eyes flashing with indignation. How dare a lowly creature threaten the noble house of Malfoy and its friends? "Hold still," he bellowed, sweeping his wand toward the creature. But the troll's hide was as thick as iron and its natural magic resistance immense. The jinx merely fizzled against its flesh. Still, a cry of anguish broke from its throat as a sharp sting blossomed at its thigh, courtesy of the tiny man beside it, his wand a sharpened stick digging in mercilessly. "Hold still," Draco repeated, voice ice-cold with contempt. Crabbe and Goyle, slow on the uptake but gifted with a knack for nasty curses, bent low and began to chant in ugly guttural tones. Spells of binding and burning poured from their wands, striking the troll in a blinding flurry of sparks and green light. The beast staggered, roar mingling with the hissing sewage. Its massive frame wavered on unsteady legs. Spells whipped around it in a relentless storm, each one hammering at its edges of defense. At last, with a final shuddering groan, the troll collapsed forward into the lingering spray, limbs flopping like a discarded rag doll. Silence reclaimed the bathroom, broken only by the drip-drip of wastewater fleeing from the broken pipes. Draco Malfoy straightened his cloak, wand still at the ready, and surveyed the mess with a satisfied smirk. "Next time," he drawled, voice cold as winter glass, "think twice before you trample on Malfoy territory." He turned on his heel and strode out, Goyle and Crabbe scuttling at his heels, leaving the defeated troll and the ruined lavatory as testament to their, let's say, unique brand of hospitality. In that split second, their thoughts were a tangle of fear and urgency. But with Draco already lunging forward, the rest of them raised their wands and fired off the same spell, aiming at the troll's ankles. Confringo! They cried in unison. The troll's innate magical resistance flared, partially deflecting the enchantment so that his legs weren't bound solidly. Still, the sudden shock and the force of the spell striking low threw him off balance. With a thunderous roar, he pitched forward and crashed to the cavern floor. Pain erupted in his groin with such intensity that he bellowed in agony, releasing his grip on the hefty wooden club, which clattered away across the stones. Chapter 147, Broken Giant Monster Head, time 6:50 p.m. The troll's roar echoed down the corridors, and Professor Quirrell, still skulking in the restricted section on the 4th floor, felt his face drain of color. A cold, furious voice snapped from right behind him. "You imbecile! How on earth did that troll end up on the 5th floor?" Quirrell whirled around, utterly baffled. He was sure he'd dispatched the troll to the dungeons long ago. The real headache had been Hagrid's 3-headed dog, an almost impossible creature to contain. He'd poured every ounce of magical energy into subduing it quickly and quietly, hoping to avert any unwanted attention. Clearly, the Dark Lord's scheme to bribe Hagrid with dragon eggs in exchange for the dog's cooperation would have to go ahead after all. A grin flickered behind Quirrell's turban. "My vault, with the Philosopher's Stone in my pocket, a few 100 galleons are nothing. Should I drop by Borgin and Burke's, or slip into the Hog's Head to enlist Mundungus Fletcher?" Lost in these calculations, he backed away from one of Professor McGonagall's enchanted chessmen, then another, unwittingly knocking loose the barrier that held the 3-headed dog in check. In the very same instant, Severus Snape, summoned by the commotion, stepped into the hall. Quirrell's triumph dissolved into horror. The beast was awake, Snape was advancing, and the troll had vanished somewhere above them. Perhaps it was Snape's accusing glare that first sent shivers through Professor Quirrell, but it was Voldemort who truly sensed his servant's turmoil. "Fool, find Mundungus!" boomed the Dark Lord in Quirrell's mind. Quirrell clutched his temples as fresh waves of agony ripped through his skull. Once more, Voldemort was punishing him for deceit. Voldemort sneered at his own captive thoughts. Borgin's pockets are already full. He won't risk a dragon egg smuggling run, and even if he did, Borgin and Burke have grown too wary of trouble. He paused, relishing Quirrell's pain. As for Mundungus Fletcher, Dumbledore prizes him for his extensive contacts. The Order of the Phoenix wouldn't turn him away. But he's spineless and greedy. He's already betrayed Dumbledore once, and given enough galleons, he'd sell the Minister of Magic's underwear without a second thought. Down in the dungeon corridors, Professor McGonagall and the others abandoned their search, racing up to the 5th floor. At the same moment, Harry and Ron, hearts pounding, stood before the closed door where the troll had been trapped. A sudden crash from within froze them in place. Someone must have harmed the troll. Harry's fingers trembled on the doorknob. After a tense moment, he yanked it open, and both boys charged into the room. The 3 Malfoys, Draco, Blaise, and Pansy, were pressed low to the cavern floor, wands aimed at the cave troll's ankles. The beast huddled over a fresh wound at its groin, blood soaking through torn cloth as it tried to steady itself. Its massive club, smeared with a yellowish goo, swung erratically in its other hand. Suddenly, Harry, Ron, and Hermione burst into the chamber. The troll spun toward them, snarling, then lumbered forward, each step sending pebbles skittering across the stone. One massive foot shattered a water basin against the wall. "Draco, flank it, now!" Harry yelled. He wrenched a corroded faucet from the wall and hurled it. The iron fitting struck stone with a deafening clang. The troll came to an awkward halt a few yards away, one hand pressed protectively over its injury. Its beady eyes flicked from the fallen basin to the newcomers, searching for its next target. When Harry darted to its right, the creature hesitated for only a heartbeat before lumbering in pursuit, brandishing its club above its head. "Over here, you great oaf!" Ron taunted, dashing to the opposite side. He flung a length of metal pipe like a javelin. The bar spun end over end, arcing straight at the troll's legs. Here's a polished, idiomatic English revision of the passage. Draco and the other two Slytherins seized the moment and sprinted for the door, but they weren't planning to flee. Wands at the ready, they feigned attack positions, poised to back up Harry, Ron, or whoever needed help next. The troll, however, paid no mind to the metal pipe that had thudded into its shoulder. Instead, it froze at the sound of frantic shouting, swinging its grotesque, flaring nostrils toward Ron. Harry used its distraction to slip around behind the creature. Each echoing yell made the troll more unhinged. It fixed its yellowed eyes on the trio by the door and let out a guttural roar. Then it lumbered forward toward Ron, closest, cornered, and with no clear escape. Ron's feet scrambled on the cold stone as the troll hefted its club, preparing to strike. Hidden just out of sight, Harry's mind raced through possible spells. Levitation charm? Useless. The troll gripped its club tighter with every surge of pain. An all-out jinx would blow right off its thick hide unless it hit a precise weak spot. An impossibility in the chaos. And what if a misfired curse only served to enrage the beast further, dooming Ron instead? As the troll advanced, Draco and the other two readied themselves to strike again, their hearts pounding. They knew a powerful blow might incapacitate the creature, but they also feared that any sudden provocation could trigger a fatal counterattack on Ron. This version preserves all key actions and character motivations while smoothing the flow and sharpening the tension for an English-speaking audience. Although Draco Malfoy had never cared for Ron Weasley, tonight's events had unsettled him, and even Crabbe and Goyle, into seeing Ron as something more than just the Weasley kid. Faced with a rampaging troll, however, Draco froze in terror. Only Harry had the presence of mind to act. Harry's mind raced for a spell potent enough to fell a fully grown troll, one that had once even knocked Professor Quirrell off his feet. "Periculum," he shouted, aiming his wand at the beast's broad back. The unstable crimson sparks leapt from his wand, coalescing into a single scorching beam. The troll froze, its snarling face contorting in surprise, and then with a crack that echoed through the corridor, its skull split apart like a bursting watermelon. White brain matter and gray tissue spattered across Ron's robes, followed by a flood of dark red blood. The creature's enormous body convulsed once, twice, and then collapsed onto the cold stone floor. Harry's reflexes, honed by years of dodging Dudley's blows, sent him lunging clear of the carnage just in time. Ron was not so lucky. He sank to his knees, his face turning ashen, and the dinner he'd just eaten came up in a choking torrent. Draco, Crabbe, and Goyle recovered themselves and rushed forward, hauling Harry back to his feet. But all three froze again, their expressions twisted in horror as they stared at Ron, drenched in gore and vomit, tangled in bits of troll brain. Nobody spoke. The hush that fell over them was as heavy as any curse. Draco wrinkled his nose and waved toward the dripping pipe in the corner. "Weasley, the pipes are finally clear. Why don't you take a quick shower before you come in?" Harry tapped his foot impatiently. "Yeah, Ron, get cleaned up, then join us." Ron paused by the broken pipe but said nothing until Crabbe sneered from the doorway. "What are you doing over there? Why use the water right by the toilet? There's a perfectly good sink on the other side." Ron's cheeks burned with anger. He was certain Draco and Harry had set him up, but he bit back his retort. The two of them shared a dry chuckle as Ron braced himself to step under the grimy stream. At that moment, the door burst open. "What in Merlin's name is going on here?" Professor McGonagall demanded, striding in with Snape close behind. Quirrell shuffled in last, eyes widening to saucers at the sight of the hulking troll jammed into the stall. He let out a feeble whimper, sank onto the nearest toilet seat, and clutched his chest. Draco's face was red with fury. "There's a troll in the bathroom. Crabbe got trap. Ed on the 5th floor. We came looking for him." "Professor Quirrell, weren't you supposed to be on guard? You left the young wizard all by himself. Didn't it occur to you to alert the other professors? I'm going straight to my father about this." Chapter 148. Chiluo is held accountable. At exactly 7:10, Ron and Harry exchanged anxious glances. Would house points be lost for this morning's chaos? Meanwhile, Draco Malfoy strode up to Professors Snape and McGonagall as if nothing were amiss. He who so often threatened to summon his father's influence at the slightest provocation now carried himself with a confidence that, to Ron and Harry's surprise, almost made him seem imposing. Professor Snape knelt beside the unconscious troll, his dark eyes sweeping every bruise and smudge for signs of improper magic. Across from him, Professor McGonagall's lips were as pale as chalk, her face a mask of anger, shame, and concern aimed squarely at Ron and Harry. "Clean this up," she ordered crisply. With a single, precise flick of her wand and a quiet incantation, the entire corridor was restored to pristine condition. Muddy footprints vanished, stone walls lost their slick stains, and even the students, Harry, Draco, Goyle, Crabbe, and Ron, found themselves spotless from head to foot. Harry frowned under the scrutinizing gazes of their professors. "Professor, wouldn't it be simpler to target the troll's mess with a single-point cleaning charm? Why affect all of us?" From the stairwell came a ripple of snickers. Several Ravenclaws, never shy about flaunting their house's cleverness, revealed their true natures in that moment. Snape rose to his full height, voice cold as ice. "Who cast that cleaning spell?" Draco inclined his head in mock deference. "I trust you know this was an unforgivable curse, Professor. Or are you planning to deduct points from Mr. Potter for good measure?" Behind him, Goyle and Crabbe shifted uneasily. Ron, however, couldn't suppress a wry smile at Draco's bravado. The corridor crackled with tension, McGonagall's reproach, Snape's suspicion, and Draco's smug defiance. And so the day's reckoning began. Professor Snape's dark gaze fixed on Harry as the last echoes of the troll's roar faded away. "So, it was you, Harry Potter." Harry's heart clenched, until Snape surprised him by softening. "I'm not accusing you of anything," he continued, voice low. "I'm simply curious. That spell you used, it wasn't black magic, and it's unlike anything I've seen before. It's extraordinarily powerful." For a moment, Harry could have sworn he saw pride flicker in Snape's eyes, a look he hadn't experienced since scoring the winning goal as Gryffindor's seeker. Professor McGonagall, still catching her breath, met Snape's astonished expression with one of her own. Quirrell, however, looked more rattled than any first year, trembling as though the very stones of Hogwarts might topple on his head. "Professor Quirrell knows best," Ron blurted, scrambling to his feet now that he'd washed the worst of the troll's slime from his robes. He shot Quirrell a sympathetic look. The poor man really didn't need the rest of them piling on. Harry held up a hand. "Actually, Professor, it was just the red spark variant, the single flash version I read about in that old arithmancy text." Quirrell's eyes widened until they were almost comical. "But Professor Dumbledore specifically warned that the red spark purifies by burning. A living target should be incinerated, reduced to ash." He gestured helplessly at the bulky troll sprawled unconscious on the floor, its fur untouched and its limbs unscorched. "That creature should be in ashes," Harry finished. "I know. I don't understand it either." Before Quirrell could stammer back an answer, Draco Malfoy, who'd been hovering at the edge of the scene, stepped forward with a mocking bow. "Well, Professor, if the troll remains Hogwarts property, should we prepare to pay for the damages? After all, my father is the school's director." Quirrell looked ready to vanish. "No, Mr. Malfoy, I was merely surprised." "Enough." McGonagall's voice rang out, sharp and authoritative. She turned on Quirrell. "Professor Quirrell, this is neither the time nor the place for your astonishment. My students have just faced a rampaging troll. We will discuss the precise nature of Harry's spell in Professor Dumbledore's office, soon." She moved toward Harry and Ron. "Mr. Potter, Mr. Weasley, once you've helped the magical maintenance crew clear away, please accompany me to the headmaster's quarters." As they stepped away from the stunned professors and the still-breathing troll, Harry felt a whirl of questions. His red spark should have charred its victim. Instead, it left the creature uninjured but unconscious. And Snape's rare approval still echoed in his mind. Whatever this spell really was, it had secrets, ones he suspected Dumbledore would be all too eager to share. "What does this curse have to do with you?" Professor Snape hissed through the half-open bathroom door, his voice so cold it sounded like ice cracking. Inside, Professor Quirrell sat on the edge of a sink, shoulders trembling, silent tears streaming down his face. Professor McGonagall cleared her throat and gave Malfoy a sharp look. "Mr. Malfoy, you're a prefect. Why don't you accompany Professors Snape and Dumbledore to search the dungeons for any trolls that might still be lurking? Alert the other prefects on your way." Draco's pale face crumpled. But if he'd been turned to, what if he'd been hurt badly? His voice caught in his throat. Tears pooled in his eyes, and Ron and Harry stared at him, stunned into silence. McGonagall's gaze snapped back to Quirrell. Quirinus, I expected you to be a fine addition to our faculty, yet you abandoned a student, Mr. Crabbe, in the 5th floor bathroom when the troll breached the castle walls. How could you let that happen? Turning to Snape, she pressed on. I understand you were overcome by the curse yourself, but once you regained consciousness, where were you? You were meant to supervise your students. Why weren't you there when the danger struck? Quirrell's shoulders shook as he sobbed again, offering no answer. Around them, 5 students, Harry, Ron, Hermione, Neville, and Dean, watched anxiously, caught between loyalty and fear. The mist of tension hung heavy in the cramped space. Nobody spoke, but everyone felt the unanswered questions pressing down on them. Shouldn't the prefect have noticed when he counted the students? Professor Quirrell stammered, offering a feeble explanation. Minerva McGonagall regarded him coolly. After all, Quirrell had once been her pupil, just as Severus Snape had. She'd known them both during their school days, so it wouldn't do for him to admit he'd been prowling the restricted corridor on the 4th floor. He swallowed hard and fell silent. Well, McGonagall said at last, you were fortunate. It's rare for first years to manage a fully grown mountain troll by themselves. I'll award 5 points each to Ravenclaw and Slytherin for your resourcefulness. Now, if you'll excuse me. Professor Dumbledore, please hurry. The students are awaiting their Halloween feast in the Great Hall. McGonagall gave them a sharp nod and swept out of the room. Quirrell and Snape exchanged a glance, but offered no comment. They lingered only long enough for the other professors and the headmaster to file past, then turned wordlessly and made their way down the corridor toward the 5th floor stairwell. At last, they tumbled out of the bathroom, and mercifully, the air beyond its doors no longer reeked of troll. Harry inhaled deeply, and even Ron allowed himself a relieved breath. But Ron's relief quickly gave way to frustration. We should have gotten more than 25 points for this, he grumbled, looking at Harry. You earned far more. Draco Malfoy, leaning against the cold stone wall, smirked. Weasley, he drawled, since when do you get to speak for Slytherin? Besides, Crabbe did nothing to help. If you're going to strip credit where it's due, he shouldn't count, so our total drops to 20 points. Ron's face flushed. You can't decide that on your own, Malfoy. Professor McGonagall clearly said each of you earned 5 points for Slytherin. She never mentioned excluding Crabbe. Malfoy's pale eyebrows rose. How that you lecture me on McGonagall's intent. In any case, from this moment forward, you'll call me Draco, and you, Weasley. Ronald hardly conjures an image of nobility. You lot can head back up to the 6th floor. My associates and I will return to the dungeons, separately. He gave a curt nod to Gregory Goyle and Vincent Crabbe. The 2 boys offered vacant grins before falling in step behind him down the stairs. Ron opened his mouth, but Harry gently gripped his arm, steering him toward the steps that led upward. Together, they left the Slytherin trio behind. Ron kicked at a loose stone on the corridor floor. You know, he said grudgingly, Draco Malfoy isn't all bad. He stood up for us and got us out of that mess. Harry nodded. True, but we did save his skin too. If we hadn't bound him with that restraining charm, he might never have needed saving. Ron gave a shuddering look. Don't remind me how knocked out that troll was when we arrived. I swear, I won't be able to eat meat for a week after that. Harry rolled his eyes. Oh, come off it. You've got to admit it was pretty clever of the Slytherins to aim for its soft belly, if a bit underhanded. Clever or not, Ron huffed, I wouldn't want to be on the receiving end of one of those belly blows. That thing's magic-resistant hide takes hits only in the one tender spot. Its head's far too small to target reliably. I'd have been scrambled if you hadn't stepped in. Exactly, Harry replied. You should be glad I was between you and its club. Ron wrapped his cloak tighter around himself. All right, time to get back to the common room. I'm freezing, and I can't look at food right now until I've had a hot shower. Together, they climbed the winding stairs and came to the grand brass knocker shaped like an eagle. As Harry lifted it, a soft, musical voice drifted from within. Tell me, what's something you simply can't buy with a single galleon? Time, Harry murmured, and the portrait swung open on its own. Inside, the Gryffindor common room buzzed with activity. Students clustered around every armchair and sofa, laughing and chatting over steaming bowls of whatever feast the house elves had prepared. The air was thick with the mingled scents of roast potatoes and hot pudding. At the entrance stood Anthony, Harry's self-proclaimed biggest fan, balancing a heaping tray of food. The moment Harry and Ron stepped in, Anthony hustled forward, eager to present their plates. But Ron barely glanced at him. He gave a quick wave and darted off toward the dormitory. Anthony frowned. "What's his problem?" he asked Harry, bewildered. "He won't even look at this food." Harry grinned, patting his stomach. "Don't ask," he replied with a chuckle. "I'm starving." Chapter 49, Diary. They say that when you face a life-or-death situation with someone, you can't help but form a bond, and slaying a 12-foot-tall troll definitely qualifies. Ever since that night in the girls' bathroom, Draco Malfoy has gone out of his way to greet Ron. The Weasley twins were so astonished they forgot to tease him for once, and even Percy absent-mindedly left his prefect badge in the Great Hall. Ron received a letter from his father, Arthur Weasley, brimming with concern. Was Draco really that malicious? Had he slipped Ron an aphrodisiac? Meanwhile, Lucius Malfoy himself descended on Hogwarts this Saturday, more anxious than ever. After nervously inspecting his son to make sure he wasn't, well, changed, he stormed off to accuse Professor Quirrell of wrongdoing and demanded that the Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher be expelled. Voldemort was furious at Lucius's rude challenge to his authority. Had Dumbledore agreed to the Malfoys' request, Lord Voldemort might have shown Lucius just how dangerous it is to cross him. Instead, Dumbledore refused, and Lucius left unaware of how narrowly he'd escaped the Dark Lord's wrath. According to Draco, Lucius Malfoy had been livid at first. How dare his only son waste time socializing with a Weasley? He stormed into Draco's room, berating him for fraternizing with that family. Then, almost as an afterthought, Draco had said, "But father, Harry Potter and I have also become friends." The effect was instantaneous. Lucius's fury evaporated, replaced by curious excitement. "Potter?" he asked. "What is he like? I'll send him a gift at once." Now it was Monday morning in the Great Hall, and Ryan sat between Harry and Ron as they digested this news. Both of them stared at him. Lucius Malfoy buying presents for Harry Potter? It was unthinkable, yet Ryan merely shrugged. "This Harry isn't the same boy we'd expect from the old timeline," he said evenly. In the original world line, Harry had arrived at Hogwarts nobly but unremarkably. At best a gifted seeker, nothing more. Why would Lucius Malfoy ever take him seriously? But this year's Harry had made himself impossible to ignore. First, there was the incident with Professor Slughorn, when Potter sent him flying with a perfectly aimed spell. Lucius had probably chalked that up to theatrics, Dumbledore hyping his so-called chosen one. Then came the troll. Draco saw it all with his own eyes. Harry, cornered in the dungeon, stepping forward with calm precision. One single, crushing blow to the creature's thick-skinned head shattered its skull like glass. A troll's brain is well protected by magic-reinforced bone. Any wizard worth his wand typically binds its limbs and strikes the temples. Yet Potter's punch alone was enough to drop the troll dead. Draco's father, hearing about such raw power, couldn't help himself. He wanted in on the future hero's favor, hence his sudden desire to send Harry something nice. Harry and Ron exchanged stunned looks, while Ryan just grinned. In a school full of magical surprises, this one was only just beginning. Ryan paused in the corridor, mind racing. He'd long known that Horcruxes shrugged off ordinary magic. No simple curse or jinx could touch them. Lucius Malfoy understood that too. Yet until recently, Lucius had chosen to cultivate his ties with Professor Quirrell rather than approach the far more formidable Albus Dumbledore. Only after Voldemort reclaimed parts of his memory did the true prize, the Diary Horcrux, come into play. Ryan had assumed that a second-year student could never smuggle such a powerful dark object into Hogwarts. It seemed unthinkable. He'd underestimated Malfoy's resolve. When classes finally ended, Ryan sensed Lucius's presence again, quietly slipping through the castle. This time, he carried more than just a wand and faultless courtesy. Several dark artifacts were concealed on his person, Horcruxes among them. Inside Dumbledore's office, the headmaster's desk was already strewn with mysterious objects, a cracked orb that pulsed with innerly, got a faded locket bound in iron, and the leather-bound diary that lay open to an empty page. "Good evening, Lucius," Dumbledore said warmly, gesturing to a chair. His blue eyes were gentle, but Ryan detected a steely edge beneath their calm. Lucius offered a curt nod. "Professor, a few weeks ago, much like what happened to Bertha Jorkins, I began recovering the memories Voldemort erased from me when I was under his control." He signaled to the array of dark implements. "These items, especially this diary, were hidden in my house by you-know-who himself." Dumbledore leaned forward, fingertips touching. "I suspected as much. The protections around Hogwarts make it difficult for a Horcrux to cross the barrier." He paused, studying Malfoy's composed expression. "You risked a great deal by bringing them here." Lucius's pale lips curved in a slight smile. "I risked even more keeping them in my home, sir. Voldemort's design was to ensnare me. But now I present them to you, so they may be secured where they truly belong." As Lucius placed the diary and its fellow dark relics before Dumbledore, Ryan realized how nearly he'd been blind to Malfoy's ambitions, and how high the stakes had just grown. Even though he was under the Imperious Curse, he still erased this memory, Lucius Malfoy said, in a quiet, measured tone, as if unaware that Dumbledore already knew he had truly been a Death Eater. Dumbledore picked up the small, leather-bound diary and ran his fingers over its cover. His eyes sparkled with triumph. "You arrived so late, slip in so secretly, all for this?" he said softly. At last, he had confirmed the existence of Horcruxes, apart from Harry himself. Now came the harder questions. How many Horcruxes remained? Should they be destroyed immediately, risking Voldemort's suspicion and making the others even harder to find? And did Voldemort know that Harry was one of his Horcruxes? For the moment, it seemed Professor Quirrell had no desire to harm the boy. Lucius said nothing. Dumbledore tapped the polished surface of the desk, deep in thought. "Lucius," Dumbledore said finally, leaning forward, "do you recognize this diary?" Lucius paled but shook his head. He sensed this object was far more significant than he had realized. Still, he forced his composure back into place. The Dark Lord had remained hidden for 10 years, and Lucius knew his own loyalties would soon be tested beyond any doubt. As long as a Horcrux endures, a fragment of Voldemort's soul remains tethered to this world. And right now, Dumbledore said gravely, that fragment resides in Professor Quirrell, whom you are preparing to impeach. His storm-gray eyes locked onto Lucius Malfoy's, unblinking, as if peering straight into the man's heart. "Impossible," Lucius barked, voice cracking. He lunged toward the open diary on the desk and jabbed a trembling finger at it. "Destroy it at once! Dumbledore, you must obliterate that Horcrux. The Dark Lord is out for vengeance against me. He's targeting my son, my family. I am a Death Eater. I deserve punishment. But spare us. Kill Quirrell. Kill Voldemort." Dumbledore's lips curled in a faint, disapproving smile. "Lucius, you dare pronounce your master's name so freely? A Death Eater, yet you tremble at the mere mention of him." Lucius's face went ashen. He looked down at the silver, serpent-headed cane in his hand and let it drop. The staff clattered across the marble floor, its emerald eyes rolling to a stop. He twisted his fingers together, his next words caught somewhere between fear and desperation. Before he could speak, Dumbledore raised a calm hand. "There's no need for Azkaban just yet. You are far more useful on the outside. I'll contact you with my next instructions." Relief and dread warred on Lucius's features as he managed a stiff nod. Dumbledore's voice softened. "Rest assured, Lucius, I am watching Voldemort's every move." Dumbledore leaned back in his chair, the flicker of candlelight casting gentle shadows across his calm face. "By all means," he said, voice low. "Feel free to keep protesting to Professor Quirrell. Pretend you know nothing." He paused as though listening to some silent counsel. Lucius Malfoy stood before him, staff in hand, every muscle taut with barely concealed apprehension. "So you really believe Voldemort is behind all this? And the diary?" "Exactly," Dumbledore replied. "I've avoided confronting Voldemort directly because I suspect he's split his soul among multiple Horcruxes, and his true purpose at Hogwarts is to steal the Philosopher's Stone. As for the diary, we must handle it quietly, without alerting him. It would be far wiser to." He let the sentence trail off, but Lucius needed no further explanation. He inclined his head in silent agreement. In a nearby lounge, Ryan watched the exchange in stunned silence. Lucius Malfoy's boldness was astonishing, nothing like the man he'd known in the original timeline. Back then, Harry Potter had been an unremarkable boy, Dumbledore too old and cautious to risk anything decisive, and all of the headmaster's plans shrouded in secrecy. In that version of events, after Professor Quirrell murdered Harry and later slipped away to the forbidden fourth-floor corridor, he discovered that Voldemort still did not realize Harry himself was the Horcrux anchoring him to the world. Now, in this charged quiet, each of them understood how much was at stake and how dangerous the next move would be. In his second year at Hogwarts, after the diary Horcrux was destroyed, Ryan realized that Voldemort had hidden far more pieces of his soul than anyone had suspected, but he didn't lose any sleep over it. By their 5th year, the Dark Lord had returned to bodily form. When Severus Snape confirmed the resurrection, Ryan noted with interest that Voldemort still couldn't sense which Horcruxes had been destroyed. Then, during the summer before their 6th year, Albus Dumbledore set out on his own hunt for the remaining Horcruxes. He recovered the Gaunt family ring, unaware at first that it was the legendary Resurrection Stone, and unable to resist its pull, slipped it on. In the end, though, he destroyed it. Dumbledore's willingness to confide so much in Lucius Malfoy stemmed from a grim certainty. Malfoy had no means of escape. If Voldemort ever learned of his betrayal, death would be his only reward. The world is full of strange twists. Ryan had simply given fate a little nudge and watched events unfold in ways no one could have predicted. Chapter 150, Lucius Malfoy's Gift. November's arrival brought a bitter cold to Hogwarts. The mountains surrounding the castle were slate gray and capped with ice and snow, and the Black Lake lay frozen under a steel-blue sky. Each dawn revealed a fine layer of frost coating every lawn and pathway. From an upper window, you could spot Hagrid on the Quidditch pitch, bundled into his long moleskin coat, rabbit fur gloves, and enormous beaver fur boots, as he carefully thawed broomsticks. Clearly, Quidditch season was upon them. All the while, aside from those directly involved, only Ryan knew exactly what was happening behind the closed doors of the headmaster's office. In the course of his investigations, he stumbled upon an unexpected twist. After collaborating with the Wizards of Atlantis to produce basic consumable potions, their market price had collapsed. The fallout was immediate. Professor Quirrell quietly abandoned his gruesome scheme to harvest unicorn blood for his so-called beast blood elixir. Simply put, he couldn't afford enough galleons to carry out the plan. Ryan stared at that revelation in dismay. Without Quirrell's macabre project, his own carefully laid plans were in jeopardy. He'd originally intended to make a spectacular entrance, swooping in just as Professor Quirrell prepared to attack the unicorn, then quietly convincing Quirrell to steal the Philosopher's Stone and strike Diagon Alley ahead of schedule. And when term ended, he'd still have next year to torment his childhood idol, Harry Potter, just for sport. But everything had unraveled thanks to Quirrell, really Voldemort in disguise, who'd made it his personal mission to keep close tabs on Harry and crush any chance of interference. What a headache. Ryan shook his head and folded his arms. You know what? Forget it, he muttered. I'll give Harry a break for now. From then on, the castle settled back into its usual sluggish rhythm. Classes drifted by, homework piled up, and the only thing that stirred any real excitement came one Friday morning at breakfast. Draco Malfoy came skidding into the Great Hall, detoured straight for the Ravenclaw table, and dropped a long, slender parcel in front of Harry. Here, Draco said without a glance back, a little gift from my father. He turned on his heel and went to claim a seat with Crabbe and Goyle. Ron leaned across Harry. Open it, I can't wait to see. Harry carefully peeled back the brown paper to reveal a sleek black leather case, the words Broomstick Repair Toolbox, stamped in gleaming silver across the lid. Seriously? Hermione murmured, eyebrows raised. Harry lifted the case, turning it over in his hands, as Ron gaped. Well, Harry said slowly, forcing a grin, I've never had to fix a broom before, but I suppose it's the thought that counts. He exchanged bewildered looks with his friends. Outside, the castle clocks chimed, and the morning light settled on the strange, unexpected gift. Whatever Malfoy's father had in mind, it looked like Harry's weekend was about to get more interesting. Harry slid the lid off the wooden box and peered inside. "Wow," he breathed. Nestled in velvet were a hefty jar of Fleetwood's high-performance broomstick polish, a pair of gleaming silver wire cutters for on-the-fly repairs, a small brass compass with a swivel bracket for long-distance flights, and a leather-bound broomstick care manual. None of the items struck Harry as extravagant, but the thoughtfulness of the complete kit left him impressed. He would never have remembered all of it himself. Word of the mysterious gift spread through Hogwarts in no time. Some students whispered that it must be Lucius Malfoy's lavish dowry present for his future daughter-in-law. Others claimed it was a Death Eater's trap to sabotage Harry's broom. With Quidditch season about to begin, however, and no sensational scoop from Rita Skeeter, the rumors quickly died down. After weeks of intense training, Harry was now preparing for his very first match, Ravenclaw versus Hufflepuff on Saturday. A win would vault Ravenclaw into third place in the House Cup. Once again, Harry Potter was the talk of the school. After all, he was the only first-year playing on the team. Some of the older players patted Harry on the back, telling him he'd play brilliantly. Others joked they'd prop a mattress beneath him to cushion any falls. Harry didn't know which was more mortifying. The real shock came during the tactics meeting. For the first time ever, Roger Davis, the team's seeker, drew up plays specifically for Harry. Up until now, Roger had only ever discussed seeker maneuvers. He'd never offered guidance to the chasers or beaters. He introduced two new techniques, the sloth roll and the Wollongong zigzag. In a sloth roll, you literally wrap yourself around your broom, arms and legs hugging the shaft, and slow your momentum enough to let a bludger pass harmlessly by. The Wollongong zigzag, borrowed from the chasers, is a high-speed weaving pattern designed to shake off any rival in pursuit. Roger pointed out that seekers could use the zigzag as well, not to catch the snitch, but to dodge bludgers aimed their way. Oddly enough, the keeper never came up once in all of Roger's diagrams, as if he didn't even exist. When Harry relayed these revelations to Ron afterward, his best friend's face turned bright red with anger. Someone pointed out that in Gryffindor, his brother didn't need extra beaters. He only had to focus on chasing the golden snitch. Anthony nodded in agreement, but then suggested that the extra beaters might be covering up their team's weak batsmen. His comment nearly set Anthony and Ron at each other's throats. Quick as ever, Harry cut in with a question about who'd be guarding the goalposts, steering the conversation away from an all-out brawl. As Harry readied himself for the upcoming match, his thoughts drifted to the mysterious gift Lucius Malfoy had given him. A new idea took shape in his mind. Perhaps it was the headmaster's, or at least Lucius's influence that had secured him the seeker position. The notion amused Harry, but didn't really bother him. Watching all this, Ryan couldn't help but think Harry was lucky. Ravenclaw's Quidditch squad trained mostly indoors, and since Harry preferred staying inside during the week, he'd sidestepped the usual crowd of fans eager for an autograph. His stellar grades meant that even rigorous practice hadn't dented his homework, and with the Quidditch Symposium scheduled for Saturday afternoon in the Ravenclaw Common Room, Harry had every excuse to keep himself holed up in comfort until the big game. Since his journey to Atlantis, Harry had devoted almost all his energy to mastering magic, and as a result, he'd fallen behind on watching Quidditch Origins. Today's symposium more than made up for that. When Professor Roger ended his lecture, Harry learned that there are 700 different ways to commit a foul in Quidditch, and astonishingly, they all came to light during the 1473 World Cup. He also discovered that seekers, typically the smallest and swiftest players on the pitch, suffered the most severe accidents. While fatalities in Quidditch are rare, there have even been referees who vanished for months, only to reappear in remote corners of the Sahara Desert. Time flew, and before Harry knew it, the day before his first Quidditch match had arrived. During the mid-morning break, he and Ron slipped out into the castle's frosty courtyard, leaving Ryan and Hermione behind in the warm classroom. To be honest, Ryan couldn't fathom why anyone would leave a cozy room on such a bitter morning just to get some fresh air. Meanwhile, Harry quietly admired how far his magic had come. With a flick of his wand, he summoned a cluster of vivid blue flames that hovered in his palm, like delicate bluebell blossoms. Proof, he thought, that his magical aptitude was now rivaling Hermione's. They were carrying it around in a jam jar. Harry and Ryan stood with their backs to the fire, letting the heat chase away the chill of the night air. At that moment, Snape emerged from the shadows and crossed the courtyard, his robes sweeping the flagstones. Ryan glanced up, lips curling into a faint smile, and with a subtle flick of his wand, summoned a gust of wind. The breeze rattled Harry's cloak and sent embers dancing skyward, forcing him to pivot, and that's when he saw it. Snape limping, every step betraying pain, and the hem of his robe caught in the wind, riding up above his knee. Harry's breath caught. There, clear as day, was a ragged, bloody wound on the potions master's thigh, raw flesh puckered with old scars and still weeping. The memory hit him like a curse. Weeks ago, the three-headed dog had snapped at Snape on Halloween. He'd assumed the injury was long since patched and magically sealed, just as it appeared in the movies. Ryan had even mused that perhaps, in another timeline, Snape might have been bitten on the eve of the Gryffindor-Slytherin match instead. In any case, Harry never noticed the wound during potions class. Snape's robes were always impeccably repaired, his gait unnervingly even. But tonight was different. Tonight, the wound had flared up again, uncontrollable and unmistakable. Even here, beneath the faint glow of embers and moonlight, it spoke of Snape's vulnerability, and of secrets Harry was only beginning to understand. It looks like the chapter text itself didn't come through. Could you please paste the full passage you'd like me to revise? Once I have the original machine-translated text, I can work on smoothing out the language and making it flow naturally in English. Chapter 151, Hagrid's Secret, Part 2. Friday afternoon. The break between potions lessons and the dungeon corridors felt colder than usual. Harry sat on a stone bench near the bubbling brazier, its pale blue flames casting eerie shadows on the walls. He couldn't tear his eyes away from Professor Snape as the potions master swept past him, clutching the hem of his robes over one thigh and limping off toward the staff common room. "Harry, did you see that?" Ron whispered, rubbing his arms to keep warm. A thin draft wound its way along the corridor, stirring the flames and sending them flickering. "What happened to Snape's leg? Do you think he got that from some creature in the Forbidden Forest? He looked perfectly fine this morning in class." Harry frowned, pushing himself to his feet and peering after Snape's retreating figure. "I don't know," he admitted. "But it might tie in with those troll attacks from earlier this term. We've heard there are all kinds of beasts lurking in the forest. Trolls, werewolves, possibly worse. Something, or someone, is causing trouble out there." Ron shivered. "Great," he muttered. "Just what we need." Harry glanced back at the brazier, its flames curving like wisps of pale smoke. He leaned closer to Ron. "Actually, if you look at the size and shape of that wound, it matches the bite of a Cerberus, Hagrid's three-headed dog. Its magical resistance is said to be even stronger than a troll's, and you can't distract all three heads with a Confundus charm at once. The jaws gnaw straight to the bone, and the infection sets in fast. If it isn't treated properly, the flesh turns gangrenous. You can stem the rot with advanced healing spells or a potent salve, but it always flares up again within days. A full recovery takes almost a month." Ron's face went pale. "That's awful. But at least it's only dangerous for wizards, right?" Harry shook his head. "Nope. If a muggle got bitten, there'd be no magic strong enough to reverse that kind of damage. It would be permanent." A hush fell between them as the wind rattled the dungeon's iron grates. Harry's stomach knotted. Snape's limp had never looked so severe, and if Hagrid's three-headed dog was really on the loose, there was no telling what else might be prowling the Forbidden Forest. The brazier's blue flames crackled in the silence, as though warning them that Hagrid's secret was far darker and far more dangerous than they'd ever imagined. Professor Binns cleared his throat. "In Greek mythology, this creature is sometimes called the watchdog of the underworld." Ryan, who had been lurking in the back corner of the classroom, spoke up in his usual soft drawl. "It's so rare, in fact, that the Ministry of Magic hasn't even classified it as dangerous." Harry's eyes widened. "So Professor Snape wasn't attacked today. His injury must date back to Halloween," he murmured. "Halloween," Ron and Harry blurted at the same time, exchanging a glance. Their attention flicked to Ryan, but they barely registered his presence. He had a knack for appearing out of nowhere. The bell rang, cutting short any further questions. Harry and Ron packed up, forcing themselves to focus on their next lesson, though both felt their hearts racing. Later, at dinner, Ron leaned across the table. "There's definitely something strange going on in the Forbidden Forest. First the troll, now a three-headed dog." Harry nodded. "We should ask Hagrid. He's the keeper of keys and grounds. He'll know what's going on." After plates were cleared, the two slipped out of the castle under a violet dusk sky and headed across the grounds to Hagrid's hut. As they approached, they were surprised to see Ryan standing by the half-open door. Inside, Hagrid was busy pouring tea, steam wafting from the kettle. Harry and Ron exchanged a quick look. They'd come seeking answers, and it seemed they weren't the only ones. As they stepped into Hagrid's hut, Fang padded forward eagerly, so eagerly, in fact, that the hound's slobber splattered all down Ron's robe. "Ha, Harry, Ron, why decide to show up now?" Hagrid called from beside the fire, sliding a small iron skillet onto the hearth. "If Fang hadn't turned up, I'd have been out on my Forbidden Forest patrol." He flipped a row of sausages with a satisfied sizzle. Harry and Ron exchanged a quick, knowing look. "Hagrid, we wanted to ask about the three-headed dog," Harry began, but Hagrid cut him off, eyes widening in surprise. He slammed the skillet down so hard the sausages leaped. "You've been up on the 4th floor, haven't you? That old fishwife Mrs. Norris nearly had your hides for it before. Looks like Filch wasn't entirely mistaken to guard that corridor." Hagrid's beetle-dark eyes flicked toward the portrait of Mrs. Norris's unseen master, Argus Filch. Mischief always seemed to follow that part of the castle. "But Professor Snape got bitten," Harry said quietly, stepping in front of Ron as the redhead flared up. "None of your concern," Hagrid growled, wagging a thick finger. "That's top. Number 1, secret business. Fluffy, my three-headed hound, doesn't take kindly to strangers. If you go poking around where you don't belong, one of those heads might decide your neck makes a better bone than a sausage." He glared at them both. "Consider yourselves warned." With that, Hagrid turned back to his skillet, leaving Harry and Ron staring after him, sausage scent and warning echoes hanging in the smoky air. Hagrid had always been recklessly casual when it came to magical creatures. He tended to shrug off any hint of danger. So if even he was calling the three-headed dog hazardous, it had to be serious. No wonder Professor Quirrell, Ravenclaw's star graduate, harboring Voldemort's spirit, was forced to tiptoe around Hagrid just to learn the creature's weaknesses. Anyone who went in unprepared wouldn't have the strength to survive the later tasks. Harry's eyes narrowed. "A three-headed dog? You mean Fluffy?" He sensed he was about to uncover something big. Hagrid gave a sheepish grin. He's mine. Picked him up from a Greek traveler I met in the Leaky Cauldron last summer. I've only lent him to Professor Dumbledore for safekeeping." He flipped through his notebook, the crackling pages sounding oddly like sausages sizzling in an iron skillet. Then he slammed it shut. "All right, that's enough questions. That's secret number 1. Understood?" Harry exchanged a look with Ron before pressing on. "Is that what was in that filthy little bag we fetched for your birthday? So Dumbledore really wanted a three-headed dog?" Hagrid's face turned beet red. No, you've got it all wrong," he snapped, clearly rattled. Hagrid's face darkened as he turned on the three of them. "Now listen, you three, Hermione, Ron, Harry, you're meddling in matters that don't concern you, and it's dangerous. Forget the three-headed dog and whatever it's guarding. This is between Professor Dumbledore and Nicholas Flamel." Harry's eyes went wide. "So it does involve Nicholas Flamel, then?" Hagrid slammed his fist on the table. "Not a word of this to anyone. Understand?" Without waiting for an answer, he stalked off, leaving them to stare after him in stunned silence. At supper, Hagrid poked at his food and barely addressed them before brusquely dismissing them from the table. No one dared press him further. The moment Hagrid was out of earshot, Harry jumped to his feet. "It has to be in that little bag Hagrid brought up from the castle," he said. "Someone's planning to steal the Philosopher's Stone, the same person who broke into Gringotts on my birthday. Snape must have set Fluffy on Hagrid to catch that intruder, but the dog only obeyed Hagrid's music and bit him instead. And the troll on Halloween? Same culprit. Dumbledore already has the stone, so there was no evil intent in lending me the invisibility cloak. He must be on our side. Harry paced between Ron and Hermione, words tumbling out in one breath. But what exactly is the Philosopher's Stone? What does it do? And how does Nicholas Flamel fit into all of this? Harry glanced at Ron, eyebrows raised. When have I ever said Dumbledore was a bad person? Ron shook his head, still trying to process. I know. Nicholas Flamel invented the Philosopher's Stone and has lived for over 600 years. The stone can turn any metal into gold and produce the elixir of life. Harry nodded, but he fell silent about the invisibility cloak. Ryan had made him promise never to mention it. Gold and immortality? Ron echoed, wide-eyed. That three-headed dog Fluffy must be guarding the stone. Flamel and Dumbledore are old friends. Flamel probably asked Dumbledore to keep it here at Hogwarts instead of Gringotts. He knew someone would try to steal it. Exactly, Harry said. A single object that creates limitless gold and grants eternal life. Ron let out a low whistle. No wonder dark wizards would break into the two safest places in the wizarding world, Gringotts and Hogwarts. Who wouldn't risk everything for that kind of power? Emberth, Chapter 152, Ron's Suspicion. It was 7 o'clock in the evening, and Harry and Ron strolled just outside the castle walls, heads bent in conversation about their latest lessons. Suddenly, Ron stopped in his tracks and fixed Harry with a wary look. Wait, Harry, he said, voice low. I know Snape's been going out of his way to help you lately, but doesn't that strike you as a bit odd? Harry halted beside him, eyebrows raised. Odd? What are you suggesting, Ron? That Snape has some secret agenda. Think back to our first potions class, Ron urged. Remember how Snape said he could teach us to improve our reputations, brew glory, and even prevent death? Did you hear that? Prevent death? He mimicked Snape's clipped, disdainful tone so perfectly that Harry felt a chill. Snape may be doing you good turns now, Ron continued, but he's human. He has his own ambitions. If the Philosopher's Stone turns up, what's to stop him from using it for his research and then quietly slipping it back when he's done? Harry frowned, glancing toward the distant turrets. He's helped me too, though. Why would he turn on you? If you're going to be suspicious, Ron countered, why stop at Snape? Look at Professor Quirrell. He used to be so timid, and now he's changed overnight. And don't forget what Dumbledore said about my red spark and its power of purification. Doesn't it make you wonder if everything we've been told is the whole truth? For a moment, the two friends stood beneath the fading evening sky, castle gates looming ahead and doubts swirling between them. Finally, they exchanged a silent nod and stepped inside, each lost in thought about who they could truly trust. Harry and Ron were huddled together in a quiet corner of the Gryffindor common room, their heads bent over the day's puzzling events. Ryan sat nearby, leaning forward with keen interest. In my opinion, Ron began, Quirrell must have been cursed, forced into helping steal the Philosopher's Stone. Harry nodded. That would explain why he completely forgot about Crabbe and couldn't tell Professor McGonagall where he'd been. He was almost certainly prowling the forbidden fourth-floor corridor when she quizzed him. Ron tapped his chin. And did you notice how he somehow reached the fifth-floor landing faster than anyone else? Snape must have caught wind of something and raced up to the fourth floor right behind him. McGonagall, though, she's not the sort to spring into a sprint. Exactly, Harry said, his eyes alight. Quirrell's behavior is suspicious, but who's really pulling his strings? It can't be Snape, can it? Remember, Quirrell was once Snape's student. Snape knows all his old secrets, including the Philosopher's Stone's hiding place. He could have cursed Quirrell into compliance. Ron frowned. Of course, because Snape always takes it out on me. Harry gave him a teasing grin. You don't have to be the center of Snape's attention all the time, you know. Ron crossed his arms. Too late. Thanks to your schemes, I nearly got expelled and wound up wandering the grounds with Hagrid. Ryan, who had been listening in silence, fought to keep his surprise in check. They were dangerously close to the truth, and as fellow time travelers, he knew Harry's instincts were rarely wrong. I still want to hear about all the funny things Mum got up to when she was young. Ron grumbled dramatically, hands on his hips. And I want dirt on both of them. Mum and Dad. Then, if they ever embarrass me, I can get my revenge. He snorted with laughter, clearly distracted from his earlier sulk. Harry glanced over at him. He considered joining in the teasing, but his thoughts drifted elsewhere. The next morning dawned clear and crisp. In the great hall, the air was thick with the mouth-watering aroma of sausages sizzling on the grills. Students clustered around the long tables, chattering excitedly about the day's big Quidditch match. Ron seized a sausage the size of his hand and took a hearty bite, as if making up for having missed Hagrid's legendary breakfast feast. Yes, day. Here, Harry, have one, he said between chews, extending a fork. Harry pushed his plate away. Thanks, but I'm not really hungry. Anthony Goldstein, seated beside him, frowned with concern. Come on, mate, have some toast at least. I can't, Harry muttered. His stomach churned with nerves. In just under an hour, he'd have to face the stadium stands. He'd fought merpeople in the Black Lake and vanquished a mountain troll single-handedly. Yet now, with an unpredictable Chudley Cannon's keeper, a shaky team, and the weight of being James Potter's son on his shoulders as the Seeker, he felt completely unsteady. He closed his eyes and took a slow, steadying breath. Ron nudged him. Don't worry so much. You'll do fine. Harry forced a smile and picked up a slice of toast. Even if it didn't settle his nerves, at least it was better than nothing. Ryan had known this all along. If Harry's teammates had been the original Gryffindor squad, things might have turned out differently, but there was no changing the past now. Harry, stay sharp, Michael warned, liberally slathering ketchup on his sausage. As the Seeker, you're their biggest target. Thanks, Michael, Harry replied, offering him a grateful nod. By 11 o'clock, the stands surrounding the Quidditch pitch were packed. Students crowded the high-risers, most clutching binoculars, and even from those dizzying heights, the play on the field was sometimes hard to make out. High above it all, Ryan and Hermione slid into seats with Ron, Neville, Anthony, and Anthony's younger brothers, Terry and Michael. They'd prepared a spectacular surprise for Harry, a massive banner proclaiming Potter must win. Terry's paintbrush had traced a great eagle poised to take flight at its center, while Anthony charmed the letters to shimmer in rotating house colors. Not long after, Draco Malfoy arrived with 2 lackeys and dumped himself onto the bench next to Ron. Ron simply snorted in response. Back in the Gryffindor locker room, the opposing keeper finally emerged. He was a hulking figure, broad-shouldered and formidable, like Dudley Dursley grown into a professional bruiser. Harry's stomach flipped at the thought of facing Dudley, now decked out in Hufflepuff's bright yellow. And if he slipped up, Dudley would be there to savor every second of his embarrassment. Sliding into their sky-blue Quidditch robes, Harry and the rest of the team barely registered Roger's pre-game pep talk. All right, everyone, focus, Roger barked, striding in front of them. We're up against Hufflepuff this time, and we can't afford to lose. He turned and clapped Harry on the shoulder. Listen up, Harry. When the quaffle comes at you, hang on to it like a sloth clinging to a branch, and dodge those bludgers in a zigzag pattern. Got it? Henry snorted from the back of the group. Seriously, Roger? If Harry zigzags all over the pitch, how's he supposed to catch the snitch? Roger bristled. I'm the captain, Henry. I call the plays. Their voices rose in a heated debate. Time was running out before practice ended. Harry looked around sheepishly. He still didn't even know which teammate was the beater or which one stood in goal as keeper. The shrill blast of the coach's whistle cut through their argument, signaling that the warm-up was over. Harry took a deep breath, tightened his grip on his broom, and steeled himself for whatever came next. He might be out of his depth today, but he wasn't about to let Dudley or anyone else see him back down. Harry watched as the 2 chasers openly voiced their frustrations to Roger, while the 2 beaters and the keeper remained silent, as though the match wasn't their concern. He trailed behind Roger out of the locker room and headed toward the stands. The crowd was modest, but Harry's heart skipped a beat when he spotted Dudley sitting front and center, eagerly awaiting the game. Madam Hooch, acting as referee, hovered on her broom in the middle of the pitch until both teams assembled around her. As always, she called out, I expect a fair and honest game from everyone. Harry tore his eyes away from Dudley and noticed a banner soaring above the crowd. Bold letters proclaimed, Potter must win. A few rows down, Draco Malfoy jumped up and waved, his pale blonde hair glinting in the sunlight. Not to be outdone, Ron sprang to his feet as well. Malfoy scowled, then signaled to Goyle and Crabbe, who hoisted him onto their shoulders for a better view. Harry couldn't help but laugh. In that moment, all his pregame jitters vanished. Henry, a tall boy with honest eyes and a shock of golden hair, leaned close and murmured in Harry's ear, "Well done. You're flying just like the famous Harry Potter himself. Before long, you'll be up here on your own. Trust me, it's an experience you'll never forget." Professor Hooch's voice rang out across the pitch. "Mount your broomsticks." She lifted her silver whistle to her lips and blew a single, piercing note. Harry vaulted onto his Nimbus 2000, heart pounding with excitement. At once, all 15 players sprang onto their brooms and shot skyward, slicing through the morning mist. The match had begun. Chapter 153, Roger's Dismissal. The clock on the Quidditch pitch had just clicked 11:30 when the match began. Ravenclaw's chaser, Roger Davis, rocketed forward, snatching the quaffle in a lightning-quick move, only to find it slip from his hands a heartbeat later. Right behind him, his teammate Henry McGrath dove in and claimed it midair. "What a feint!" Lee Jordan, friend of the Weasley twins and today's commentator, shouted into his microphone. But seriously, why didn't anyone anticipate that? "Jordan," Professor McGonagall's sharp reprimand echoed from the sideline. Lee flushed and offered a hasty bow. "Sorry, Professor." Regaining his composure, Lee continued, "Henry, the blonde powerhouse from Ravenclaw, charged down the pitch and delivered a picture-perfect pass to Phoenix Whitlock, the second-year seeker with nerves of steel." Back on the field, Roger Davis recovered quickly. He skidded toward Hufflepuff's goal, feinting left, then darting right, only to realize the quaffle was no longer in play. Whitlock had knocked it free and sent it spiraling back toward him. At that moment, Hufflepuff's goalkeeper, Pete Carter, soared into the air and met Roger head-on, blasting the quaffle away with a flawless volley. From his seat on the pitch, Harry felt a surge of adrenaline and dread. The game was barely underway, and already it threatened to unravel in the most spectacular fashion. Lee Jordan had assumed that, thanks to his friendship with the Weasley twins, Harry would be too nervous as a Quidditch newcomer to call out warnings, and that any wobble in his flight must be down to pressure. But as Harry climbed into the air that afternoon, he realized his uneasy descent earlier had nothing to do with nerves. Something far stranger was at work. No sooner had he taken up position above the pitch than he spotted a flash of gold behind the Hufflepuff chasers, the snitch. With a surge of adrenaline, Harry dove toward it, only to find Roger Davies hurtling into his path. "Oi, Potter," Roger called, swinging his bat. "Remember to zigzag. Watch your back for the bludgers." That interruption would have been bad enough, but two other beaters, this time from Ravenclaw, proved even worse. Rather than protecting their own chasers, these two treated the bludgers like prey. They darted after both balls with single-minded fury, weaving in front of Harry again and again so he couldn't maintain a straight line on the snitch. Neither bludger nor Hufflepuff player ever threatened to strike him, yet his supposed teammates kept colliding with him, turning his quest for the golden snitch into a gauntlet. By the time he managed to shake them off, Harry was forced to climb again, lungs burning, to get back into contention. He couldn't decide which frustrated him more, the reckless beaters blocking his path, or the sudden realization that winning this match might hinge on outmaneuvering his own side as much as the opponent's. Either way, it was going to take every ounce of skill he had. Harry couldn't take his eyes off Roger Davis. While the other Hufflepuff chasers were still fighting to break free from Ravenclaw's defense, Roger lofted the quaffle to Henry, who had managed to slip closer to the goalposts. Henry wriggled past two defenders and sent the ball winging toward Phoenix. At that moment, Phoenix signaled for Roger to swoop low while she lofted it high, but Harry thought it unnecessary. Roger already had every eye and the keeper's full attention trained on him. Phoenix had the clearest shot, yet she diverted the ball back to the most covered player. Surely the chance would be squandered. Instead, in one breathtaking instant, Roger dropped his shoulder, spun around the keeper's outstretched arms, and slipped the quaffle under his guard. The net rippled. Goal! Now freed from dodging quaffle traffic, Harry half-turned back to the snitch, only to find Roger streaking at him in a jagged zigzag, cutting him off and blocking his path once more. What on earth is Roger Davis doing? Jordan's voice crackled over the stadium loudspeakers. Harry Potter was this close to snatching the snitch, but he broke off as a wall of sound washed over him. Every Hufflepuff in the stands was roaring Roger's name so thunderously Jordan couldn't even hear himself think. Mistaking them for Ravenclaw fans baying for his attention, he threw up his hand, bearing a greasy grin and 8 crooked teeth, and blurted into the mic, "Hufflepuff scores." Harry rounded on Harry Potter in mid-flight. "This is all your fault. If you'd stuck to our tactics, I wouldn't have been distracted." "I'm sorry." Roger began to sputter, but before he could say more, a bludger came hurtling straight at him. Crack! He tumbled off his broom. From the stands, Professor McGonagall reacted instantly. With a flick of her wand, the turf beneath him sprouted upward into a soft, grassy cushion that broke his fall. Roger scrambled to his feet, red-faced with fury and realization. "Dennis, you idiot! You nearly knocked me out!" Perched a dozen feet away, Ravenclaw's beater Dennis sneered. "Oh, shut it, Roger. I'm done playing by your rules." Harry, watching the exchange, felt a surge of relief. With Roger sidelined, his path to the golden snitch lay open. "Are you blind?" Dennis called after Roger as he stalked off down the pitch. Before Roger could retort, the crowd erupted into cheers so loud that Lee Jordan's voice crackled and cut out over the loudspeakers. In that moment of pandemonium, Harry did something no one expected. He released his grip on the broomstick and hovered a foot above the ground. With a graceful motion of his right hand, ethereal silver wings unfurled between his fingers, shimmering in the afternoon light as they fluttered, ready for flight. Flashback 3 minutes. Ravenclaw's beaters, Dennis and his partner Woody, had been hatching this very play, one that would leave their own chaser free to hunt the snitch. And now, with their tactic in motion, the real game began. The afternoon sky hung low and gray over the Quidditch pitch as Hufflepuff's players settled into their strategy. The beaters kept a constant watch on the bludgers, freeing their teammates to concentrate on more critical tasks. They'd never faced a seeker of Harry Potter's caliber before, and they intended to make every second count. From the first whistle, it was clear someone on Hufflepuff had studied the snitch's flight pattern in advance. Whenever Harry dove, a defender was already in place to intercept him. Twice he'd lunged for the golden snitch, only to be turned away at the last moment. Frustration began to show on his face. Meanwhile, Dennis Creevey hovered near Jordan Roll, leaning in close. He'd caught Jordan's whispered instructions and steadied his nerves. As Harry launched into a third desperate chase, Roger Davis shot out from behind the defense, ready to bar his path. Harry's broom bucked under the strain of the block, just as a stray bludger whistled past Roger's shoulder. In that instant, Dennis swung his bat with all his might. The bludger smashed into Roger's broom, sending him spiraling off course. Harry seized his chance. He twisted upright, stretched out one hand, and the golden snitch was his. The stadium erupted. Ravenclaw supporters poured out of the stands, converging on Harry with cheers and pats on the back. He rose above them, the gleaming snitch clasped triumphantly in his fingers. Roger Davis, dusting sawdust from his robes, trudged over, his face a mask of bewilderment. "Potter," he muttered, "that was just luck. We had your flight path locked down. Winkler, refocus on our formation. This isn't a game of chance." A teammate barked a retort. "If you'd flown with a few more feints instead of straight at him, he never would have had the opening. Next time, zigzag like I taught you. Don't make it so easy." Harry, still catching his breath, simply smiled. In Quidditch, as in life, he thought, fortune favored the bold. Roger hardly noticed the stunned looks his teammates were giving him. He cocked his head. "What was that, Davis?" he asked, trying to keep his tone even. Davis squared his shoulder, and stepped forward. "First off, why did we open with a backpass routine? Henry was the closest player to their hoops. He should have been our first scoring threat. This isn't a play for show. It's a game to win." He paused, letting the words sink in. Then, once Henry started finding his rhythm and you saw an opportunity to set up Phoenix, you pulled Pokov's bait-and-switch trick so Phoenix would pass the quaffle back to you. Why? Before Roger could answer, the team's official captain, Johnny, a tall, lean figure, joined in. "And after that?" "With Harry soaring as our star seeker and Woody and Dennis neutralizing their bludgers, you still insisted on sending Henry's kid, the slowest flyer we've got, After the snitch? What did you expect us to do if Harry actually caught it first? Roger's face went red. Henry and Phoenix didn't cooperate. They were too slow. Aren't my tactics brilliant? A heavy silence fell. Davis shook his head. They don't even like you, Roger, and they certainly weren't deliberately refusing to play. You treated this match like it was your personal spotlight. Even as acting captain, you blocked our seeker's flight lane and lost sight of the bigger picture. Dennis's perfectly timed deflection alone should have made you realize how off your strategy was. Roger opened his mouth, but no words came. All around him, the pitch lay waiting, empty and expectant, while the wind stirred the banners overhead, echoing the unease that now rippled through the team. You don't have what it takes to stay on this school team, Captain Johnny snapped, his voice sharp enough to make Roger flinch. Before Roger could answer, the rest of the squad drifted in, drawn by the tension. Johnny folded his arms and leveled a hard stare at him. Forget tactics, only the win matters. That's my final piece of advice. Captain Johnny shook his head in frustration and turned away, leaving Roger standing alone on the court. Chapter 154, Clear Rules. Harry pressed his lips together, feeling the awkward tension in his chest. Roger Davis was notoriously unreliable. Everyone knew that. But Harry couldn't deny that some of Roger's ideas had actually helped him become the team's seeker. As he replayed the last match in his mind, he realized something important. The two beaters he'd written off as bunglers had, in fact, been executing a sophisticated plan. By intercepting stray bludgers before they entered the pitch, they'd effectively neutered Hufflepuff's offensive play. That clever tactic had come straight from Roger, born of late-night study sessions on the opposing team's style. Why hadn't Roger ever explained this to him? Harry thought. He'd only just joined the squad and didn't yet know all the tactics. Roger, scornful of any role besides chaser or seeker, had given him nothing but bravado and half-baked schemes. His lack of proper training led him to misjudge Harry's true capabilities, and his love of grandstanding often buried useful ideas under excessive flair. Now Harry couldn't help but wonder if his own impatience had helped push Roger off the team. Come on, Harry, Ginny said, shaking her head. You know Roger was unreliable, but that doesn't mean he didn't contribute. He was the one who assigned those beaters to protect you, albeit in his own over-the-top way. Harry let out a frustrated sigh. I know, but he almost sidelined Oliver at keeper too. He didn't trust anyone except chasers and seekers. Ginny gave him a sympathetic look. Maybe it's time we set some clear rules. No more underestimating anyone's position, and no more jumping to conclusions about people's motives. Harry nodded, determined. If this team was going to work, everyone needed respect and a fair chance, no matter where they stood on the pitch. Did he even bother to design any tactics for the keeper? Harry muttered, poking listlessly at his breakfast. That's all Captain Johnny's call, Ron replied, flashing him a reassuring smile. Why are you worrying about it? Harry managed a small shrug but couldn't summon an appetite. Within minutes, news of his shaky performance had spread through the team. Roger approached him after practice, face flushed with embarrassment. Harry, I'm sorry, Roger said quietly. I realize now I shouldn't have undercut you. Captain Johnny made the decision, and I accept that. But I still owe you an apology. Harry nodded tersely. Roger's sincerity was plain, and there was little point in holding a grudge. From the sidelines, Ryan shook his head. He's still too green to captain us, he sighed. Roger's got a lot to learn. Ryan was right. In the original timeline, Johnny had never stepped aside mid-season. He'd stayed on as captain, guiding Roger steadily all year. Under Johnny's wing, Roger matured, so much so that Ravenclaw toppled Gryffindor even without Harry, clearing the way for Slytherin's Quidditch Cup victory. By the time Johnny reappeared later, Harry had seen him as thoughtful and reserved, not reckless. But in this timeline, Roger had been promoted captain prematurely. His inexperience showed in every play. He didn't know how to harness a seeker as talented as Harry, and he insisted on being the team's focal point. Still, the rest of the Ravenclaw squad, while hardly stars themselves, executed his orders to the letter. They never questioned him on the field, and only grumbled about his questionable tactics once brooms were stowed away. Dennis Crumb didn't hesitate. With a powerful flick of his bat, he sent Roger Davies tumbling off his broom and out of the play. The crowd gasped, and in that instant of chaos, Harry Potter seized his chance. He plunged into a dive, eyes locked on the golden snitch, and claimed victory for Gryffindor. The stands erupted in cheers, but for Harry, the triumph felt strangely hollow. He landed hard on the ground, breathless, and didn't bother to rise. His teammates surrounded him, slapping him on the back and congratulating him, but Harry couldn't shake the residue of self-doubt. Then, as if sensing his turmoil, Ryan's calm voice sounded in Harry's mind. "Harry, do you know where your surname actually comes from?" Harry closed his eyes and let the adrenaline drain. He had heard fragments of this story before. "You told me once that I'm descended from the third Peverell brother," he said quietly. "That's true," Ryan acknowledged. "But the name Potter isn't a direct branch of the Peverell lineage. It evolved from an old nickname, the Potterer." Harry frowned. Potterer? In the 12th century, a wizard named Stinchcombe Linfred earned that nickname. He was a brilliant alchemist, credited with inventing the bone elixir and a number of potent stimulants. It's very likely your innate talent for potion making comes from him. Harry sat up. "So how did my family end up with the name Potter?" Ryan's voice was patient. "Linfred's eldest son, Hadwin, married a young witch from Godric's Hollow. Her name was Iolanthe Peverell, granddaughter of Ignotus Peverell. When their descendants dropped the cumbersome Potterer title and shortened it over the generations, it became simply Potter. At the same time, they inherited the Peverell bloodline." Harry let the news settle in. The Peverells had long been legendary for the invisibility cloak and the mysterious hallows. Linfred had been one of the greatest potion masters of his age. Through them, Harry's heritage carried both branches of magical renown: cloak and cauldron, invisibility and alchemy. He looked up at Ryan, a new resolve shining in his eyes. "So it's not just a name, it's a legacy." "Yes," Ryan agreed. "And every time you pick up a cauldron or slip on a cloak, you're honoring both sides of your family's history." Harry rose to his feet, the disappointment of the match forgotten. Today he had won more than a game of Quidditch. He had reclaimed the story of his ancestors, and with it, a deeper belief in himself. Since there was no male heir in that generation, the eldest daughter inherited her grandfather's invisibility cloak. From that moment on, the cloak passed down through the Potter line by strict male primogeniture. Harry stared at Ryan, puzzled. "So that's where the cloak came from. What are you getting at?" Ryan gave a small, wry smile. "I noticed how unsettled you've been and thought this might put things in perspective." Harry's heart skipped a beat. "You mean I'm not the only Potter who survived?" Ryan leaned forward. "There was another branch of the Potters, though few people know about them. Over 3 centuries ago, before 1693, one branch emigrated to North America. A descendant of theirs, Abraham Potter, was recruited by President Josiah Jackson as one of the first 12 Aurors when the Magical Congress of the United States was founded." Harry frowned. "Then why didn't Dumbledore ever mention living Potter relatives? Why not let me connect with them?" "Because," Ryan said gently, "that American branch descended only from the Potters, not the Peverells. The cloak is a Peverell heirloom, too precious to pass to a collateral line. As long as you carry Peverell blood, you're the true orthodox heir." "Even Dumbledore must have worked it out," Ryan mused. He'd only pieced the whole thing together himself very recently. For the longest time, he'd been puzzled by the absolute taboo against Peverell fratricide, and by who exactly had the authority to enforce it. He'd assumed it was simply a matter of surname and primogeniture. Families like Smith, Longbottom, and Potter each had a single direct heir, while all other branches were considered collateral. But when he discovered that the Potters boasted a secondary branch in the United States, everything fell apart. Driven by curiosity, he confided in Harry Potter just when Harry was most downcast and susceptible to outside influence. Ryan seized the moment to sift through Harry's messages, searching for clues about the invisible statute that, legend said, had been codified by a near-divine Peverell ancestor. Only now did the true mechanics of the no-kinslaying law reveal themselves, as tied directly to the Deathly Hallows. By ancient decree, the rightful owner of the Elder Wand must be the eldest son of the Longbottom line. But the Elder Wand had vanished long ago, and that absence introduced a flaw in the succession. one so profound that it culminated in a generation born as twins, throwing the entire inheritance into uncertainty. One branch of the Peveril line kept alive the ancient alchemical secrets needed to forge the Elder Wand. To hide their true heritage, they adopted the unassuming surname Smith and continued their magical studies in secrecy. At the same time, the other two Deathly Hallows followed a strict pattern of inheritance. The invisibility cloak passed to the eldest Potter's son, and the resurrection stone to the eldest Gaunt's son. Because of this tradition, every Potter heir, from Harry down through countless cousins, still carried Peveril blood. Likewise, Neville Longbottom, and even Ryan, the only child in his family, all traced their lineage to the original Peverils. Tom Riddle, Voldemort, though himself the firstborn Gaunt's son, never bothered to claim the Peveril name. As a half-blood, he scorned the old lineage. With Morphin Gaunt childless, Voldemort alone stood at the head of the family, and in his early rise to power, he strangely spared his uncle, perhaps unconsciously respecting the unspoken taboo against shedding Peveril blood. But his growing arrogance and obsession with immortality led him to shatter that restraint. In his quest for ultimate power, he created multiple Horcruxes and became increasingly reckless. When he murdered James Potter and attempted to kill baby Harry, the very dark magic he'd woven against his own kin backfired. The killing curse he cast rebounded, destroying several of his Horcruxes and leaving him broken and, for a time, powerless. Voldemort couldn't sense that Harry was one of his Horcruxes, not even when he hovered inches from Harry's face or briefly seized control of his body. Harry noticed Ryan's sudden silence and glanced over. "Ryan, what's on your mind? You look like you just saw a ghost." Startled, Ryan blinked. "Oh, nothing, Harry," he said hastily. "I was just thinking about something else. You're not upset with me, are you?" He forced a casual shrug, determined to return to the common room as soon as he could. Nearby, Ron watched from the edge of the Great Hall's long dining table. First he felt uneasy, then amazed, and finally completely baffled. He muttered under his breath, "But I didn't say a thing. How did Harry know?" He bit into his chicken leg, frowning in utter confusion. Chapter 155. Harry's Troubles. Christmas was just around the corner. One crisp morning in mid-December, Hogwarts awoke under a thick blanket of snow, its grounds buried feet deep, and the Black Lake frozen solid. The school's calm, however, was soon shattered by the antics of Fred and George Weasley. The twins had charmed several snowballs to chase Professor Quirrell, pelting him repeatedly just behind his turban. When caught, they insisted their motives were noble. Only by giving Quirrell a chill could they force him to bed rest, ensuring that Professor Dumbledore would step in and give them lessons personally, a prospect they declared brilliant. Professor McGonagall, overhearing their gleeful boasts, saw red. Their punishment was far more severe than anything the twins had received in the original timeline. Meanwhile, Ryan, who'd made a name for himself recently with his own brand of mischief, had abruptly gone quiet. His pranks, he admitted to himself, sprang from a sense of having nothing left to lose. Now that his chief objective, whatever it had been, had somehow been achieved, he felt oddly unmotivated to plan further trouble. After all, he'd already reshaped this magical world to suit his designs 3 years ago when he first arrived. What was left to prove? And so, as the castle hunkered down against the winter chill and the promise of Christmas festivities, Hogwarts prepared for its most unusual term yet, full of snowbound pranks, unexpected alliances, and a certain boy named Harry at the center of it all. Since the discovery of the underwater city, Moon City, Ryan's original half-baked scheme suddenly felt obsolete. Other wizarding factions were advancing far faster, and his own plans no longer held any real sway. That's why he'd turned his attention back to Harry Potter, by far the dullest diversion he'd entertained in recent months. Back when he'd been Zhou Yi reading the original story, he'd thought, the boy who lived unworthy of his heroic title. Now, having smoothed out most of his own complications, Ryan was more than ready to take on Dumbledore's mantle, to orchestrate one crisis after another until the true champion revealed himself. In fact, he'd deliberately given Harry some breathing room. After all, the Triwizard Tournament was over, the trio had learned about the Philosopher's Stone, and Quirrell's betrayal was only just suspected. It was Dumbledore's turn to set the next piece in motion. Ryan could afford to sit back and watch. Leaning on the windowsill of Ravenclaw Tower, he let his mind wander as snow swirled around the castle. A dozen owls winged through the gusting wind, each clutching letters that would soon rest and recover under Hagrid's care before their next flight. Then, abruptly, a coup! Neville's sneeze echoed up the stone staircase. A harsh reminder of one downside to dormitory life at dizzying heights. Late at night, any student who forgot to draw the curtains and close their windows would wake up the next morning with a drippy nose. Before long, Gryffindor and Hufflepuff were full of sniffles, clutching steaming mugs of restorative potions. Ryan couldn't help finding the spectacle amusing. He even toyed with the idea of wishing Kate the same fate. Of course, her growing command of magic had made her all but immune to ordinary colds, so the plan remained only a passing fancy. With Christmas vacation drawing near, no one else seemed to notice Ryan's scheming, or much else, for that matter. The entire castle buzzed with anticipation of the holidays. Ravenclaw students were just as eager. Despite Roger's recent expulsion from the Quidditch team, Slytherin's upset victory over Gryffindor, and the looming Ravenclaw House Cup, all thoughts were fixed firmly on sugar plums and winter break. By the week before Christmas, the rows of steaming foreheads had vanished altogether. The corridors grew quiet as students packed their trunks and checked lists twice. Only the common rooms remained lively. In the Gryffindor lounge and the vast, torchlit auditorium, great hearths roared with firelight. Outside those blazing cozies, however, the castle was all but deserted, every young witch and wizard having darted off for Yuletide adventures. Even puffs of steam were nowhere to be seen. The holidays had arrived at last. Chapter 12. A Bitter Cold and an Unexpected Question. The corridors of Hogwarts had emptied as the festive season drew near. Gryffindors, always eager for fun, clustered in the common room or settled into the auditorium, counting down the hours until the holidays. Left behind in the corridors were only the occasional portrait come to life, and the few students hurrying to and from class. A cold draught blew relentlessly down the stone passageways, rattling classroom windows and driving most young witches and wizards indoors. In one quiet corner by the portrait of the fat lady, a first-year named Ryan leaned against the frame, sighing. He rubbed his arms against the winter chill and muttered to himself, "This is so boring. Why doesn't Dumbledore just let Harry use the invisibility cloak? The real fun should start soon." Time, Monday, December 16 p.m., Potions classroom. Inside the dungeon classroom, the chill was relentless, but each student made a beeline for their cauldron, huddling close to the faint warmth it offered. Every exhaled breath turned instantly to a cloud of white mist. Harry Potter sat in the third row, elbows on the table, eyes fixed on the bubbling stew of stringy black roots and powdered mandrake. A hesitant voice broke the silence. "Harry." Harry jumped, his wand hand nearly dipping into the colored broth. He turned. At the next desk sat his cousin, Dudley Dursley, his hair a tousled blonde mess, his robes rumpled. Harry hadn't exchanged a word with Dudley in almost 4 months. "What is it?" Harry asked quietly, wiping a bead of cold sweat from his forehead. Dudley swallowed, cheeks pink with embarrassment. I was wondering, are you going home for Christmas?" His voice cracked on the last word. "I'm going. Mum told me to ask if you were coming too." Harry blinked in surprise. Dudley's concern was so far removed from their usual antagonism that for a moment he didn't know how to answer. Around them, classmates eyed the exchange curiously, but no one interrupted. Harry cleared his throat. "I think so," he said softly. "I'd planned to." Dudley nodded, exhaling a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Good. Mum, she'd like to see you." He glanced again at Harry, as though unsure whether to elaborate, then fell silent. The two cousins sat side by side, the heat from their cauldrons keeping the worst of the cold at bay. Outside, the wind howled, but inside that little room, a door had opened that neither of them knew existed, an unexpected truce on the eve of the holidays. Time was running out. By the second week of December, the 4 heads of house were already compiling lists of students who planned to stay at Hogwarts over the Christmas break. A week later, most of the school would empty out, families gathering for the feast on December 25th, leaving only a handful behind to celebrate in the Great Hall. Those who went home wouldn't return until the first Hogwarts Express of January. First-year students, however, still had one more day of classes. Anyone hoping to leave early could only do so once their lessons ended. Harry Potter sat in the chilly stone corridor outside the potions classroom, the draft tugging at his robes, when Dudley Dursley lumbered toward him. Dudley's round face was flushed with excitement and impatience. "Come on, Harry," he wheedled. "You know why I need you home for Christmas. I've been practicing spells." "No," Harry cut him off, his tone cool. "You know why I'm not going back." Dudley's hopeful expression faltered. "But now It doesn't matter," Harry said, turning away. He strode off before Dudley could reply, leaving him blinking in the empty corridor. At that moment, the heavy doors swung open, and Professor Snape glided in, as silent and ominous as a black bat. His dark robes billowed around him as he paused beside each cauldron, their contents bubbling softly over low flames. With a disdainful nod, he motioned for the class to begin. "Potter," he called, "take your place." Harry slid into his seat, heart thundering, as Snape's cold gaze swept the room. The hiss of the fires and the clink of vials filled the silence that followed. When the final bell released them, Harry hurried out of the dungeon and nearly collided with Ron in the corridor. "See that foot?" Ron whispered, nodding toward Snape, who was already disappearing down the hall. "Completely healed. So what's all this about the Philosopher's Stone?" Harry sighed, sensing that Christmas at Hogwarts was shaping up to be far from ordinary. "You forgot what Ryan said. His injury should heal in a month. He was bitten by the three-headed dog on October 31st, and it's already mid-December," Harry reminded them, wrinkling his brow. Ron frowned. "And you still doubt Professor Snape?" "I'm more suspicious of Professor Quirrell," Harry replied. "He let George and Fred chase him all over the snow just for a prank. Does a professor behave like that?" Ron scoffed. "Maybe, but I've already checked Quirrell's report cards. Every subject is marked outstanding, except Transfiguration, where he scored exceeds expectations." Harry nodded. "Exactly. And I'm staying at Hogwarts over Christmas. Mum and Dad are off to Romania to visit Charlie, and George, Fred, and I aren't going home either." Ron glanced around and then grinned sheepishly. "Right, and Percy." Before Harry could comment, a familiar voice called out, "Hey, Harry, there you are." Anthony, Harry's most enthusiastic admirer since the Hufflepuff match, bounded toward him, flanked by his younger brothers, Terry and Michael. Harry offered them a tired smile. Ever since that match victory, Anthony had only one topic of conversation, Quidditch. And at that moment, Harry could have used a holiday from it. Harry still smarted from Roger's expulsion. It felt like a fresh wound. Lately, every time the team gathered for practice, the others showered Harry with praise, while subtly, and sometimes not so subtly, dismissing Roger's skills. Even Captain Johnny announced that Harry would serve as acting captain during Roger's absence, and that Johnny himself would step in as chaser to fill Roger's spot. The unexpected attention left Harry more than a little frazzled. He'd barely been able to think about anything else, and he found himself dreading every mention of Quidditch. To keep his mind off the pitch, he'd been avoiding Anthony's company altogether. Chapter 156, The True Function of the Invisibility Cloak. By the time dinner rolled around, everyone in the first-year common rooms was buzzing with excitement. Tomorrow, the 17th, marked the official start of winter break for the first years, 3 days later than the rest of the school, who'd all departed last Friday. That small delay meant they were among the lucky few to witness Hogwarts in its full Christmas glory. In the Great Hall, Professor McGonagall and Professor Flitwick worked side by side, draping holly and mistletoe from the vaulted arches. Hagrid, not to be bested, kept trundling through the doors with fir trees, one after another, until a dozen towering pines stood proudly across the hall. Some were festooned with icicle charms that glinted like crystal. Others burned softly with hundreds of enchanted candles. Flitwick surveyed their handiwork with a critical eye. Muttering, "Not quite festive enough," he tapped his wand against his palm and released a swirl of golden bubbles. They floated into the branches, bursting quietly to leave a sprinkling of shimmering dust. McGonagall gave an approving nod. "This," she said, stepping back to admire the transformation, "is Hogwarts at its most magical. Christmas has never looked better." As the term drew to a close, Ryan wasn't surprised to see the dormitory emptying out for the holidays. Penelope was heading home again, and Kate, whose parents were rarely ever around, would be gone for Christmas, too. Hermione, of course, had made plans to spend the break with her family. In a sudden flash of realization, Ryan counted heads and found only 3 boys left in the Gryffindor Tower: himself, Ron, and Harry. It struck him as absurdly quiet. With half the castle emptied of students, Harry and Ron actually took to wandering the corridors for the first time all term. Traces of their mischief and merriment were scattered across Hogwarts like confetti. Between the two of them, talk of Quidditch, Professor Quirrell's odd behavior, or the Philosopher's Stone all but vanished. When they weren't exploring the castle, they would claim the coziest armchairs by the Gryffindor common room hearth, toasting slices of bread, pancakes, even mushrooms on their little baking forks, while poring over whatever books they could grab. Laughter and the crackle of the fire became the soundtrack to their days. Christmas week arrived almost before Ryan could believe it. The castle was more festive than he'd ever seen it, enchanted snow drifting in some corridors, holly and mistletoe in others, and the distant echo of carols drifting from the Great Hall. By Wednesday morning, it was finally Christmas Day. Ryan woke to a soft glow of morning light and a faint scent of pine from the tree near the fireplace. At the foot of his bed were 4 neatly wrapped presents. He recognized 2 of them immediately, one each from Kate and Penelope, and guessed the other 2 bore the distinctive handwriting of Harry and Hermione. He lay still for a moment, letting the warmth of the castle and the excitement of the day settle in before he reached out for the first package. It promised a Christmas he would never forget. Ryan rifled through his presents, half amused, half exasperated. The first 2 came from Kate and Penelope, everyday Muggle paperbacks he'd never even heard of, nice enough, but hardly enthralling. Then Harry's gift, a slim leather-bound volume entitled The Crazy Magic of Strange Wizards. A magic book? Ryan muttered, flipping it open. He appreciated Harry's thought, but the guy clearly didn't know his tastes yet. He'd have preferred some obscure fantasy novellas, not a flashy collection of sorcerers' exploits. Next came Hermione's offering, a pair of finely knitted gloves. She'd noticed he never wore any, even in winter's bite, and hoped this might change his mind. Ryan sighed as he lifted them, brushing out a few stray threads. "Thanks, Hermione," he said, though inside he was still half grumbling about mismatched gifts. His complaints were cut short by a sudden shout from across the grey at Hall. He turned to see Harry Potter grinning widely as he tore open a small silken parcel, the invisibility cloak at last. Ron beside him emitted a low, awed gasp, and soon the mantle of shimmering fabric lay in Harry's hands. Even before he had fully unfolded it, more presents, a dazzling array of baubles, books, and trinkets, began to pile at his feet. But on the edge of the table, something quite unexpected slipped free. A silver-gray, liquid-like substance oozed down the side and pooled on the floor, catching the torchlight in a curious metallic sheen. Everyone fell silent for a heartbeat, watching it gather into a perfect gleaming puddle, and then the feast of gift-giving resumed, as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. Harry stared, wide-eyed, as Ron held up the shimmering fabric. "It's an invisibility cloak," Ron announced breathlessly. "Try it on, right now." "An invisibility cloak?" Harry echoed, glancing at Ron in disbelief. "Come on," Ron urged. "Seriously, you've got to see this." Harry hesitated only a moment. He recognized the look in Ron's eyes. This was no ordinary garment. This was the legendary invisibility cloak, one of the Deathly Hallows. Lifting it out, he found the material glimmered like liquid moonlight, soft, silvery threads woven with an almost otherworldly finesse. As Harry unfolded the cloak, a slender slip of parchment fell to the floor. Ron scooped it up and began to read aloud. "Your father left this to me before he died. It should be returned to you now. Use it well. Merry Christmas." Ron frowned at the elegant, looping script. "These letters are so long and thin, almost like circles stretched out." Harry's face went pale. Silently, he thrust the note into his pocket, his heart pounding as questions tumbled through his mind. Without another word, he draped the cloak over his shoulders and vanished. Harry had learned early on at Hogwarts that most invisibility cloaks were little more than clever illusions, layers of disillusionment charm, impenetrable blindfolds, or strands woven from the hair of some elusive, nearly invisible beast. Though they might start out perfectly transparent, these cloaks always grew faintly visible with time. The one in Harry's hands was different. This cloak had belonged to his father, James Potter himself. Would Ron have guessed its true nature? Harry risked a glance at his friend, relieved to see only genuine puzzlement on Ron's face. "Harry, what's so important about this note?" Ron said, frowning over the parchment. "I've read every word." "Honestly, it's nothing," Harry lied, forcing a casual shrug as he hugged the cloak closer. Well, of course Ron wouldn't understand this level of magic, Harry told himself. A thrill shot through him. He already possessed the legendary invisibility cloak, so the next piece of his father's legacy, the Resurrection Stone, couldn't be far off. Have I grown too complacent lately? He wondered inwardly, despite the steady praise he'd been receiving from professors. Over the next few days, Ron devoted himself to hunting down an equally spectacular gift of his own, eagerly pawing through Harry's stash of surprises. The anticipation in Ron's eyes was almost palpable until he finally opened his present. Then, in the moment after the wrapping fell away, Harry saw Ron's face fall. He was deeply disappointed. By the time they'd worked their way through Hagrid's hand-carved wooden flute, Hermione's chocolate frog, Anthony Goldstein's tinkling music box, and a mountain of other odd presents from anonymous well-wishers, Harry and Ron could barely manage another "thank you." Only 3 gifts remained on the table. Ron, cheeks reddening, picked up a thick, hand-knitted sweater in bright emerald green and a large box of homemade fudge. He cleared his throat. "Mum said every Weasley should have one of her sweaters, and, well, this is yours." Without waiting for any further fuss, Harry slipped the sweater on over his robes. He grinned as Ron let out an embarrassed sigh of relief. The last 2 parcels or the infamous silver serpent mask of the Malfoys. Draco's gift proved to be a painstakingly detailed brass model of the golden snitch, wings poised as if in flight. His father's contribution was far subtler, a small, soft leather pouch stamped with the Malfoy crest. Harry unhooked the drawstrings and discovered it was completely empty. Confused, he unfolded a slip of parchment tucked inside. It read, "Harry, sorry I couldn't give you something myself. My mother insisted I deliver this to you instead." He passed the note to Ron, whose lips quirked into a half-smile. "It's enchanted with a permanent, traceless extension charm," Ron explained. "Looks empty, yet you can pack it full of whatever you like. Very expensive, too." He chuckled dryly. "Guess the Malfoys figured it'd be handy for Christmas shopping." Harry couldn't help but laugh. Together, they tucked Draco's snitch model safely into the enchanted bag and wondered what other surprises the season might still bring. Harry tried to console Ron, insisting that it's the thought that counts, but Ron remained stubbornly sullen. It wasn't until Harry griped that even Aunt Petunia and Uncle Vernon had failed to give him a single token gift this year, when in past years he'd at least ended up with Uncle Vernon's old socks, that Ron finally cracked a grin. Grinning back, Ron dumped Harry's unwanted presents into the sturdy backpack Lucius Malfoy had given him. Then Harry gently lifted the invisibility cloak from beneath the quilt and slipped it inside, just in case they needed to vanish on short notice. No sooner had Harry and Ron crept off than Ryan slipped into the empty room. With a flick of his wand, he plucked the cloak, one of the legendary Deathly Hallows, from under the covers and held it up to the light. Curious, he cast Revelio, but the spell revealed nothing. By his magical senses, the cloak simply didn't exist. He turned it over in his hands, recalling what he knew of invisibility garments. Ordinary cloaks faded in power over time. The finest models muffled sound and masked scent, as well as vision. This one, however, only blocked sight. It was astonishingly effective at hiding a wearer's form, yet it did nothing to deaden footsteps or stray odors, and no common detection magic could pierce its enigma. He remembered how, in the original timeline, Alastor Moody's magical eye could glimpse right through it. Of course, that was thanks to Moody's enchanted orb functioning as a penetrating visual enhancement, not as a device attuned to arcane energy. The cloak's magic was beyond ordinary senses, detectable only by the most powerful wards, and even they would struggle. This isn't a simple invisibility cloak, and it wasn't made to render its wearer unseen. Harry Potter was right. Its true purpose is to hide you from death itself. After all, the only way to truly defy death is to become immortal. As long as you never remove the cloak, you cannot die of old age. Chapter 157. Professor McGonagall's past Christmas at Hogwarts always felt like the brightest star in a velvet sky, magical, joyous, and brimming with surprises. Even the daintiest fairy, for all her sparkle, still needed to use the lavatory and complained of stinky feet once in a while. Yet on this festive occasion, such mortal inconveniences hardly mattered. Ryan, by contrast, felt every bit as mortal as the next. His would-be roommates, two precocious young wizards with wit and talent to rival Dumbledore in his youth, had decamped for holiday festivities, leaving him alone in the chilly Ravenclaw dormitory. In legend, Ryan might have been the flawless prince who dined without ever needing the privy. In reality, he was bored, restless, and more than a little irritable. He could have summoned a little mischief, waved his finger like a true master of chaos, and turned this Christmas into an uproar. But as a modern-day pioneer in a red scarf, he'd been raised on discipline and courtesy. He simply couldn't bring himself to stir up trouble for the fun of it. With a resigned shrug, Ryan joined the bustle in the great hall. Festive garlands twined the walls, and the long tables groaned under platters of roast goose, Christmas pudding, and the glittering promise of snowflake-shaped cookies. High above, enchanted snow drifted past frost-clad windows, making the scene all the more enchanting. At the Ravenclaw table, a familiar commotion caught his eye. Fred and George Weasley, mischief incarnate, had snagged a pair of vivid blue Weasley jumpers that matched Ryan's house colors perfectly. They grinned at each other, then lunged across the table and popped one sweater triumphantly over their brother's head, muffling his protest in a peal of laughter. "Merry Christmas!" Fred crowed. "Hey, look, Harry's got a Weasley sweater, too," George added, gesturing toward the Gryffindor table. Ryan couldn't help but smile. Despite the chill in the air and the loneliness he'd felt earlier, Hogwarts at Christmas was undeniably special, and perhaps, with a little help from friends like the Weasleys, he wouldn't be bored for long. Fred jabbed at the knitted H on Harry's chest. "See? Harry's sweater is way better than ours. Mum obviously dotes on anyone who isn't actually family." Ron tugged at his own jumper. "Yeah, mine turned out dark purple." George smirked at Percy. "And our perfect little prefect only agreed to wear his once we explained that the P stands for prefect." Percy straightened his crooked glasses and muttered, "I might as well sit with the prefects today, then." "Christmas is for the whole family," Fred and George sang in unison, weaving through the room with mock solemnity. Ron shot Percy a suspicious look, his arms pinned tight beneath the oversized sweater, his glasses slipping down his nose, and didn't buy a word. Harry caught Ron's eye, both of them silently agreeing that the twins were up to their old tricks. Fred's jumper now bore a G, George's an F, and neither Percy nor Ron had noticed. Percy kept darting glances at their shirts, hoping the letters would magically realign themselves and expose Fred and George's handiwork. Ryan couldn't help but wonder if Ron had ever bumped his head as a child. He was only occasionally capable of coherent thought. But today, the real wonder was the Christmas feast spread before them. In Ryan's opinion, it was nothing short of magnificent. Row after row, 100 plump roast turkeys glistened under the torchlight. Mountains of savory meat and mounds of boiled potatoes competed for space with oversized platters of sausage. Bowls of buttery peas shone beside dishes brimming with rich gravy and jewel-red cranberry sauce. Interspersed every few feet along the table were stacks of wizarding crackers, festive firework-style novelties that, when popped, released magical surprises. Ryan reached for one and yanked it open. A puff of sparkling blue smoke enveloped him, and when it cleared, a tiny hamster stood on the stone floor, whiskers twitching. He laughed in delight. "Well, hello there, little fellow." With a flourish, he produced a handcrafted hamster cage, an intricate gift from his patron deity. The base was lined with soft hay, and inside stood a miniature ladder, a spinning wheel, a water bottle, and a dish of fresh food. "Welcome, Dr. Hamster Flywheel," Ryan declared, gently placing the squeaking creature inside. He set the cage in a sunny corner of Smith Castle and called to Jack. "Make sure he's well looked after, will you?" Jack nodded. "Consider it done." As Jack hustled off, Ryan gazed back at the banquet, already planning which turkey leg to tackle first, and looking forward to many more magical surprises before Christmas was through. Ryan finally remembered Jerry, the tiny black cat no larger than the palm of his hand, Jack's contemporary, whom he had rescued from the castle to save Dr. Hamster Flywheel's life. Even now, the little creature refused to be quiet. From somewhere in Ryan's coat pocket came a persistent gurgle, like a motorcycle engine sputtering to life. After so many days apart, Ryan made a point of slipping his hand into that pocket each evening after dinner to soothe Jerry's soft fur. True to form, Jerry would nuzzle his head against Ryan's fingers and drift off to sleep. While Dr. Hamster Flywheel's prospects seemed bright, Ryan couldn't shake his worry for the hamster's kin. Just moments earlier, a cluster of white mice had scurried out from the remnants of fireworks near Harry, only to disappear almost instantly. Everyone knew Mrs. Norris had spirited them away for safekeeping. Ryan, ever gentle, hadn't pursued them further, but he was nearly certain of their fate. Harry noticed too, and the memory dampened his excitement about donning the miniature Rear Admiral's hat he'd found among the fireworks debris. Tonight's grand banquet encouraged every guest to let loose, and yet beneath the laughter and fanfare, both Ryan and Harry carried quiet concerns for their small, bespectacled friends. Albus Dumbledore didn't hesitate. With a flourish, he swapped his usual pointed hat for a delicately crafted women's bonnet, complete with pastel ribbons and silk flowers that bobbed every time he moved. Across the great hall, Hagrid, already half in his cups, leaned across the table and planted a soggy kiss on Professor McGonagall's cheek. The tall, black top hat perched atop her auburn hair teetered sideways, and a sudden, uncharacteristic giggle escaped her. Ryan watched the exchange in amused disbelief, and a recent bit of gossip sprang to mind. Professor McGonagall was married. Her husband had been Elphinstone Elcott, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, her boss, in fact. They'd shared a cozy cottage in Hogsmeade until Elphinstone met a tragic end, slain by a venomous magical creature's tentacle. After his death, McGonagall had never returned to that home. Instead, she took up permanent residence in the hush of her second-floor study at Hogwarts, surrounded by her beloved books. Ryan's eyebrows shot up as he recalled more. McGonagall wasn't an only child. She had 2 younger brothers, both wizards, and several nieces and nephews who visited the castle whenever holiday breaks allowed. Thankfully, there was no offspring named Fish McGonagall lurking in the family tree. If there had been, Ryan thought with a wry smile, the awkward, passive time traveler he'd once encountered might have foisted a bit of his own haplessness onto Hogwarts. A pang of sympathy stirred in Ryan's chest at the memory of Elphinstone Elcott. What a loss that must have been for Minerva McGonagall, and perhaps, he allowed himself a speculative thought, that loss explained why the gentle giant Hagrid remained ever single. After all, how could anyone compete with a professor whose charm could make both large and small hearts flutter, hats and all? Ryan's research uncovered a surprising truth. Professor McGonagall's true, lasting love was a Muggle farmer named Dougal McGregor, whom she met in her youth on her family's old farm. They'd been engaged, and for a time it seemed her future lay far from the walls of Hogwarts. But as Minerva's star rose at the Ministry of Magic, she faced a cruel choice. In Britain, just like in America, the wizarding world frowned on marriages between witches or wizards and muggles. To wed a non-magical partner, one had to surrender one's wand, abandon all ties to the magical community, and, above all, keep one's heritage a secret. Revealing magic to a muggle violated the international statute of secrecy. Only a magical child could bring an exception, and even then, rules remained murky. For ministry employees, the penalties were strict. Discovery meant dismissal. Outside the ministry's strictures, however, many in the wizarding population simply looked the other way. A witch or wizard could even invite their muggle spouse into the magical world without fear of fines, so long as no one in authority raised an eyebrow. Faced with these demands, McGonagall made the heartbreaking decision to break her engagement with Dougal. Almost immediately afterward, Elphinstone, another ministry rising star, swept in, courting her with tireless devotion. He proposed again and again, determined to win the brilliant witch whose duty to magic had cost her first love. Professor McGonagall refused time and again, until the day she learned that her first love had died. Only then did she accept the proposal. And when she married, she made a decision that shocked the wizarding world. She kept her own name for the first time and declined to take her husband's surname. Such a choice was almost unthinkable in those days, especially since McGonagall was the name of her Muggle father. Poor Elphinstone, Ryan thought, taking a sip of pumpkin juice. Chapter 158. Harry is targeted. The wizarding world, or at least Britain, has its fair share of festive traditions that feel remarkably like those back in China. In my previous life as Zhou Yi, I remembered how my parents used to hide coins in dumplings every Lunar New Year. Finding one meant you'd have good fortune all year. Tonight, at Hogwarts' Christmas banquet, we'd reached dessert, and the showstopper was, of course, the flaming Christmas pudding. Percy Weasley got lucky. Inside his pudding was a crescent-shaped silver piece. But he didn't know what to do with it. He fussed over it so much, nearly chipped a tooth on the hard coin, that he ended up reminding himself of home and the old dumpling tradition. Me? I'd already filled up on pudding and had no interest in another spoonful. Instead, what really caught my eye were the firecrackers laid out across the table. There was no per-person limit. Anyone could pull as many crackers as they could carry, and each one was stuffed with a little gift worth no more than 2 nuts. Compared to the lavish hampers I'd unwrapped earlier, these were a surprisingly inexpensive delight. As everyone around me sniffed at the pudding and fussed over their coins, I reached for a string of crackers. After all, a small surprise, whatever it was, beat a half-moon of cold silver any day. Harry watched as Ron carefully tapped the fuse on a dazzling firecracker. Unable to resist, he set aside his coveted white mice and joined in. Soon the two of them, joined by Fred and George, of course, were lighting off one explosive after another down by the Hogwarts courtyard wall. Fred paused mid-click to flash a triumphant grin. "Look what I found tucked inside this one," he said, waving a well-worn comic book. "A Muggle Doraemon. I'll bet I can get at least 3 galleons for it back home." George laughed. "Only in Gryffindor would you sneak a Muggle comic into magical fireworks." Their laughter drew curious looks from passing students, and for the rest of the afternoon, the 4 of them were so engrossed in their impromptu firework display and speculative resale values that studying was completely forgotten. When the cold finally drove them indoors, they didn't head straight back to the Gryffindor common room. Instead, they settled by the large stone hearth in an unused classroom that had become their makeshift rec room, wet coats piled on chairs, a roaring fire keeping the chill at bay. "Wizard's chess?" Ron challenged Harry with a triumphant grin, pulling a carved board from under a nearby table. Harry sank into a chair opposite him. "All right, but no mercy." Percy Weasley, who'd arrived late and was still shaking snow from his robes, hovered at Harry's elbow with a laundry list of suggestions. Every time Harry considered a move, Percy piped up, "No, Harry, cast your queen that way," or "You're forgetting to defend your rook." Predictably, Ron's bold, no-holds-barred strategy won him the match. He pumped his fist in the air. "Yes, once again I reign supreme." Harry opened his mouth for a retort, but then he caught Percy's eager face in the firelight and seized on a new idea. "Percy," he said casually, "you're brilliant in potions. Can you walk me through that essay question on the Urania root? I could use a refresher." Purser straightened, pride pushing back the last of his winter wear. With Harry and Ron leaning in, he launched into a meticulous explanation. Extracting the root's venom safely, tempering it over a low flame, and the precise wand movements needed to bind its properties into a healing draught. As Percy spoke, Ron and Harry took notes on a scrap of parchment. The afternoon's diversion had cost them study time, but if Percy's lecture was any indication, they might just make up for it. Once they'd all agreed to share the Doraemon comic auction proceeds, of course. It was soon time for dinner. Compared with lunch, the spread was modest, just a selection of drinks and snacks, turkey sandwiches, hot buttered toast, plum pudding in a wine-infused sauce, and Christmas cake. After they'd eaten, Fred and George finally made good on their promise to keep the family together for Christmas. With a whoop, they snatched Percy's prefect badge and tore through the Great Hall, tugging at Percy's robes as he stumbled after them. Percy huffed and puffed, but never managed to reclaim his badge. All the commotion put paid to Ron and Harry's plan to slip off to the Ravenclaw common room, and they remained stranded in the hall until the twins gave up the chase. By 10 o'clock, Fred and George had exhausted themselves and abandoned any further attempts at persuasion. Ron and Harry politely declined their late-night invitation and trudged back to Gryffindor Tower. Harry almost relented. This really was the happiest Christmas he could remember, surrounded by people who felt like family, but some quiet resolve held him back. Only he knew why. As soon as Ron drew his bed curtains and fell asleep, Harry lay still for a while, pretending he too had drifted off. Then, when the corridor outside was silent, he slipped a hand under his pillow and retrieved his invisibility cloak. This time, he didn't tuck it under the bed. Instead, he spread it out on the mattress beside him. It felt smoother than silk and lighter than air, practically humming with the promise of unseen adventures. From Ryan's vantage point, the curtains around Harry's four-poster bed suddenly billowed outward, then parted, revealing nothing but a hollow indent in the blankets. The cloaked figure inside remained motionless for a heartbeat, as though checking his surroundings. Then the drapes snapped shut again, Harry's discarded shoes beside the bed vanished, and the dormitory door swung open and closed so silently that no one with ordinary hearing could have noticed. Ryan slipped off his own bed and watched as Harry's invisibility cloak dissolved into the air. There he stood, as real as ever, Jerry the Owl perched obediently on his shoulder, ruffling his feathers as though glued in place. At the same moment, high in the headmaster's office, Dumbledore set down his quill and allowed himself a faint, knowing smile, as if he'd just glimpsed something he'd been waiting to see. All around Hogwarts, the ancient magic seemed to awaken. Enchantments laced with Dumbledore's mischievous warmth crept through corridors like living vines. Even Filch, deep in the castle's bowels, paused mid-step, then inexplicably drifted toward the 6th floor. Ryan frowned for an instant, then his lips curved into a slight grin. All day long, one thought replayed in his mind, the message Dumbledore had attached to Harry's most precious gift, his father's invisibility cloak, one of the Deathly Hallows. "Use it well," the note had said. "Use it wisely, and for yourself alone." He'd been waiting for this moment, his first chance to try out his father's invisibility cloak all on his own. He didn't want to wake Ryan, who already knew everything, including the secrets of his best friend Ron, so Harry slipped quietly from under the covers and draped the cloak over his shoulders. He knelt down and peered at his legs. Only moonlight and shifting shadows remained. It was a strange, thrilling sensation. For the first time, the entire castle lay open to him, and not even Filch could detect his presence. Holding his breath, he eased off the bed, crept down the stairs, and tiptoed past the snoozing figures in the Gryffindor common room. He nudged open the portrait of the fat lady, slipped through, and found himself in the silent corridor. Harry paused, heart pounding, as he considered his options. Where should he venture first? The trophy room? The kitchens? The astronomy tower? Suddenly, distant footsteps echoed around the corner. He pressed himself flat against the cold stone wall, every nerve on edge. Argus Filch's lantern bobbed into view, the caretaker's harsh eyes sweeping back and forth as if they could bore right through the cloak. Harry froze. The beam of light drifted nearer. He felt Filch's gaze penetrate the very walls, yet he remained invisible. The caretaker muttered in frustration, lifted his lantern, and finally lumbered off in the opposite direction. Only when Filch's footsteps faded did Harry let out the breath he'd been holding. A rush of exhilaration filled him. The cloak had passed its first test. Now, with Hogwarts at his feet and mystery every step of the way, he could finally explore the castle's hidden corners, completely unseen. Severus Snape's dark eyes locked onto the footprints in the corridor. He muttered under his breath, "Bloody brat. I've patrolled the 6th floor half a dozen times tonight. There has to be someone here." Harry's heart thundered in his chest. He was about to dart off toward the common room when Argus Filch, who'd seemed to slip away, came skittering back down the hall, Mrs. Norris padding anxiously at his heels. "Professor," Filch hissed, addressing Snape, "you told me to report any student roaming the castle after hours. Mrs. Norris picked up a scent on the 6th floor a moment ago. I haven't spotted anyone myself, but I suspect it's a Ravenclaw." Snape let out a low, derisive chuckle. Gryffindors tend to run headlong and make a racket, he said, voice dripping with contempt. Ravenclaws will slip by quietly. Filch, station yourself at the entrance to the common room. Don't let anyone through. Unseen by Harry, a flicker of annoyance passed over Snape's face, his lips curling into a slight pout. The effect was almost comical, his greasy fringe now framing him like some ill-fitting crown. And Ryan, tucked into the shadows nearby, couldn't resist the urge to immortalize it. With a discreet flick of his wand, he conjured a quick sketch of Snape's expression, already eager to share it with his friends. Harry froze, caught between bolting for safety and watching what would happen next. Ryan smirked. I'll hand it to Snape tomorrow, his belated Christmas gift. Harry's face went pale. Filch's sticky, greasy voice was drawing closer, and there was nowhere to run. He counted off silent steps backward, mind racing, until he spotted a door on his left, ajar just enough to slip through. Heart pounding, Harry eased himself inside, crouching low and careful not to knock the frame. Safely hidden, he pressed himself flat against the cool wood and let out a shaky breath. Outside, unsuspecting, Professor Dumbledore and Ryan passed by, each wearing a genuine smile Harry hadn't seen in ages, then continued on their way, oblivious to his presence. Chapter 159, Snape's Anger, Midnight on the 6th floor. Harry crouched in the shadows of an empty classroom, listening as Filch's and Snape's footsteps receded down the corridor. Finally alone, he took in his surroundings. The room looked like forgotten storage. Desks and chairs were heaped against one wall, casting a looming dark shape, and an overturned wastebasket lay on its side. Opposite him, however, stood something that clearly didn't belong, a magnificent, full-length mirror that reached to the ceiling. Its lavish golden frame rested on two claw-shaped feet, and along the top edge, someone had carved an inscription in neat script. Wang Yuan Deshongshin Nishi Erlian Denishi Budechu Zhaowo. With the last echoes of Filch's footsteps gone, Harry felt his tension ease. He stepped forward, drawn by the mirror's gleam, and prepared to study his own reflection. After all, barring any surprises, he'd be spending the rest of the night right here until dawn. Harry climbed the stairs from the 6th floor toward Ravenclaw Tower with a queasy feeling in his gut. He was half convinced that Snape or Filch might be lurking around a corner, watching his every move, and he was pretty sure he was starting to come down with a cold. But all thoughts of chills and detentions vanished when he reached the alcove that held the famed Mirror of Erised. The glass was blank. Harry stopped dead in his tracks. He stepped closer, heart pounding, until his nose nearly touched the frame. Beside him, Ryan held his breath, his eyes fixed on Harry's face. At first, Harry looked startled. He whirled his head as if someone had called his name from behind. Then his face drained of color, and he stuck out a trembling hand, blindly groping at empty air. Dumbledore, who had silently crept to the far corner, furrowed his brow, as though he suspected a boggart had somehow taken residence in the mirror, or that its enchantment had faltered. Then Harry's posture straightened, and Dumbledore's puzzled expression softened. In the mirror's depths appeared a woman of stunning beauty. Her hair was a rich, dark crimson, and her eyes, Harry's eyes, gleamed with an unspoken longing. Tears shone on her cheeks, even as she offered him a sad, loving smile. Next to her stood a tall, slender man with black hair, gently wrapping his arm around her shoulders. Harry felt a sudden swell of emotion he'd never experienced before. He gazed into the mirror, breath caught in his throat. Dumbledore watched silently, a knowing tenderness in his eyes, and Ryan edged closer, careful not to break the spell. The man staring back at them wore round spectacles and had hair every bit as unruly as Harry's, tufts sticking up at odd angles, especially a stubborn little spike at the back of his head. Harry pressed his nose so close to the glass that it flattened against the surface, widening comically, yet Dumbledore could not bring himself to laugh. He saw in Harry's eyes a fierce longing, the ache of a boy desperate to recognize the faces before him. "Mom?" Harry whispered, and then, a moment later, "Dad!" He shifted his gaze from one reflection to the next, as though trying to commit every detail of these loved ones to memory. Dumbledore wiped rapidly at his own tears, moved by the boy's silent yearning, but at the same time he felt a growing confusion. Thanks to the mirror's magic, Dumbledore saw exactly what Harry saw. James and Lily appeared unmistakably, Green eyes, familiar noses, the same proud tilt of their heads. But the others in that long line of relatives were distorted copies. Every one of them had Harry's bright green eyes and the same slightly crooked nose. One elderly gentleman had even the same uneven knees. James's mother looked nearly right, except for those emerald eyes, while the rest bore uncanny resemblances to Harry himself. Dumbledore frowned, mysteries unfolding behind his gaze as he tried to fathom why the mirror should show Harry's deepest wish with such strange inaccuracies. Ryan, watching from the edge of the room, glanced first at Harry and then at Dumbledore. Drawing on everything he knew of the Potter family, and factoring in Dumbledore's advanced years, he could almost pinpoint the headmaster's uncertainty. After all, in the entire Potter line, only Lily had green eyes. Harry still harbored faint, dreamlike memories of his parents, images that remained unaltered, but he had never seen his grandparents. Fleamont Potter, Harry's grandfather, and his wife Euphemia had James late in life and lavished him with love. They lived long enough to attend James's wedding to Lily Evans, a Muggle-born witch, but both succumbed to dragonpox before Harry was born. So when Harry imagined their faces, he filled in the details himself, though his vision of Fleamont bore the same strong jaw and silver hair that marked every male Potter. Dumbledore didn't dwell on the matter. His gaze returned to Harry, still transfixed by the mirror's depths. Hour after hour, Harry stared until exhaustion claimed him beneath his invisibility cloak. As he drifted into sleep on the cold stone floor, Dumbledore stepped forward, wand raised. With a whispered incantation, a thick quilt fluttered into being and gently settled over Harry. Ryan watched, impressed. The blanket was charmed to vanish the moment Harry woke. Such subtle, thoughtful magic, truly remarkable. When Harry finally drifted off, Ryan slipped back into the Gryffindor dormitory and, for the first time in ages, lost himself in playful tussles with the Weasley family's cat. Meanwhile, in the headmaster's office, a far more serious discussion was underway. The portraits of former principals dozed in their gilded frames, snoring softly, until a sharp voice cut through the hush. Dumbledore, Ravenclaw Tower, stealthy first-year footprints, that infernal invisibility cloak, and the number of pupils we've had to detain. Severus Snape's ginger features were flushed with long-suppressed anger as he paced before the desk. "Quiet," Albus Dumbledore said gently, raising his wand toward their words so they could not drift beyond the office walls. He fixed Snape with a placating look. "Severus, you must understand, every precaution we're taking is for Harry's own good." From the edge of the room, the portrait of Phineas Nigellus Black roused itself, blinking drowsily. With a smacking sound, he cleared his throat. "Yes, well, meddling in a first-year's business never bodes well," he muttered. Snape's lips curled in a sneer. "Ha! I always suspected it was that boy. I was foolish enough to think he'd take after his mother. Calm, reasonable, but no. He's got his father's reckless streak. Roaming the castle at all hours under that cloak, venturing into Quirrell's domain, of all places, a man with the darkest of ties." He jabbed a finger at Dumbledore. "And that cloak, it's one of the original Potter heirlooms, isn't it? Passed down from James himself?" Dumbledore nodded, his gaze distant. In that moment, the two wizards stood in solemn agreement. Hogwarts' safety, or its undoing, might very well hinge on what happened next. Dumbledore regarded Snape over the tops of his half-moon spectacles, a teasing light in his eyes. "So it was you who repaired the cloak and saw fit to give it to the boy at Christmas?" he asked softly. Snape's dark gaze flickered. "I've known all along it was your idea, Albus." "My idea?" Dumbledore smiled. "Really, Severus? You banished Quirrell from the Gryffindor team. You single out that bookish Ravenclaw first year, who seldom leaves the library, and yet you hand him the invisibility cloak. You must have whispered some encouragement in his ear." Snape's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "He needed it. I told him to use it wisely." "Wise choice," Dumbledore agreed with a chuckle. "And the letter I sent him, of course you guessed its every word before I even sealed the envelope." "Call it professional courtesy," Snape replied, though his tone held a hint of fondness. Dumbledore tipped his head. "Off you go, then. What's pressing?" Snape drew himself up, suppressing a sigh. "I'm heading to the 6th floor to keep Filch from nanterfering." "A noble task," Dumbledore said with a grin. Worried our young scholar might catch his death of cold in those draughty corridors and be locked out of the dormitory? Snape offered no response. With a final brisk nod, he turned on his heel and strode away, his footsteps echoing sharply down the corridor. Chapter 160. Harry and Ron's Tryst. Early the next morning, Harry Potter woke with a start. He'd been sure he was coming down with a cold, but to his surprise he felt warm and perfectly fine. Glancing around, he realized he could still see the floor beneath his feet. He was wearing the invisibility cloak. With cautious excitement, he slipped from his four-poster bed and carefully wrapped the cloak around himself. Richmond Tower was silent at this hour. Ravenclaw House still lost in slumber. Harry crept from his dormitory and down the empty sixth-floor corridor toward the spiral staircase. As he climbed, the winding steps grew steeper, and by the time he reached the top, he was sweating under the cloak's folds. At last, the heavy oak door bearing the bronze eagle knocker came into view. To his relief, Filch wasn't prowling the landing, and there was no sign of Professor Snape. Harry drew a steady breath, pressed his hand to the doorframe, and whispered the password. The lock clicked, and the door swung open. Inside, the cold lamplight revealed Professor Snape, motionless behind his desk, his black robes shimmering with the disillusionment charm. His dark eyes flicked down at Harry's empty silhouette, and a thin, approving smile curled at the corner of his lips. Safely inside Snape's office, Harry let out the breath he'd been holding and prepared himself for whatever came next. Snape smirked, as if finding it almost comical that this boy bore no resemblance to James. If it had been James, he would have risked everything to come back. But Harry Potter, no, Harry Evans, was Lily's living legacy, and that made all the difference. Snape paused for just a breath, then turned on his heel, tossed his cloak over his shoulder, and swept away down the corridor. At the far end, Harry nearly ran into Ron, who'd been poking his head around corners, hunting for him. Think back to their Hogwarts days. Dorm mates who shared every sunrise, every secret, even breakfast. Ron had practically leapt out of his skin the moment he'd found Harry's empty bed, chilled and untouched. Now, after Harry stowed the invisibility cloak for safety, Ron let him have it in the Great Hall. "You should have woken me," Ron snapped, voice pinging off the stone walls. "I could have come with you, seen your family." Harry didn't meet his friend's eyes. He stirred his porridge without tasting it. "You can come tonight," he said quietly. "I'll go back to the Mirror of Erised. I want you there with me." Ron's shoulders hunched. What if Filch, or especially Snape, are watching? Ryan, seated at the next table and absently stroking a ginger cat, looked up in surprise. Since when did his best mate ever think before he leapt? Harry straightened. "I'll be careful, I promise." And for the first time that day, he meant it. Harry cut Ron off mid-sentence. "Forget the common room. Let's head straight to the burrow after dinner." Ron's eyes widened for a moment. "Okay, I really want you to meet my parents," he said, sounding more like a shy daughter-in-law than an 11-year-old wizard. Harry was used to Ron's theatrics, but Ryan couldn't help rolling her eyes. "And all your siblings," Harry added, leaning forward, excitement lighting up his face. "The twins, Ginny, everyone. I want the full Weasley tour." Ron waved a hand, as if it were no big deal. "You're welcome any time." The truth was, he'd been sorted into Ravenclaw partly to stay close to Harry, and partly because he'd had a crush on Hermione. Lately, though, Hermione had all but vanished from his thoughts. Harry was the only person he cared about now. "So come stay with us this summer," Ron pressed on. "But fair warning, if you want to try the Mirror of Erised at the Burrow, you might only see people who aren't alive anymore." He glanced at Harry's empty plate. "You haven't touched your food. You slept on the floor last night. Eat some bacon at least." Harry shrugged. "I'm not hungry." Ryan shook her head, smiling. Ron Weasley really did know how to read the room when he wanted to. When Harry wasn't interested, you might as well have been invisible. Even the most blatant cues wouldn't pull his gaze. Ron knew that all too well from the time he tried to talk Quidditch and Muggle football to him. But when Harry's curiosity was piqued, his mind snapped to full alert in an instant. That contrast was exactly why Ryan rolled his eyes this morning. He decided to play low-key at breakfast, partly to unsettle Ron about Scabbers, and partly to watch Harry's reaction to this new kitten, Jerry. Harry hated cats, especially anything that seemed even a little too clever, and he could already sense something off about the little ginger furball. In the original timeline, Harry never warmed to Crookshanks. He insisted the cat looked more like an overgrown rat, until, of course, Crookshanks proved himself invaluable to Sirius later on. Yet at the moment, Harry and Ron were so absorbed in arguing wing formations and rotation tactics for their next Quidditch match that they didn't notice Ryan or the kitten. Ryan, bored stiff, scooped a bit of scrambled egg onto the edge of his plate and held out his fingertips. Jerry hopped up, lapping at the soft yellow curds with delighted fervor. The gentle tickle of whiskers and tiny pink tongue was oddly satisfying. "Ryan?" Harry said, prompted by Ron's gentle nudge as his fork hovered halfway to his mouth. "What are you feeding him?" It was only then that the two finally looked up, their eyes widening at the sight of Jerry contentedly licking Ryan's fingertips. Ron stared in astonishment at the small creature in Ryan's arms. "Merlin's beard, Ryan. Where did you get a cat?" He couldn't help but think of his own pet rat, Scabbers. "And it doesn't even eat mice," Harry glanced over. "Ron, do you even remember its name?" "Of course I do," Ron snapped. "It's Jerry, isn't it?" "Jerry's been with me for a while," Harry said, shrugging. "He's still a kitten, practically a baby, and he usually curls up in my robe pocket for naps." Ryan grinned. "About eating mice? See that little hamster sketch taped inside your notebook? You drew it ages ago." Harry's brow furrowed. "Right, of course I remember." Ever since his first year at Hogwarts, he'd felt there was something unnatural about Jerry. A faint prickle of danger had hit him the moment he laid eyes on that kitten, and it hadn't gone away. "My poor Scabbers is practically ancient compared to this baby," Ron fretted. "Scabbers has to stay in the dormitory. You're taking the cat, Ryan." "Fine by me," Ryan said with a laugh, reaching out to soothe the kitten. He glanced at Ron's worried face and finally smiled. They checked the clock. 9:35 p.m., well before the 10 o'clock curfew. Harry and Ron exchanged guilty looks. "We'd better get back to Gryffindor Tower," Harry said. "We're staying with Ron's brother tonight." "Right," Ron agreed, hoisting his satchel. "Let's go before Filch catches us." Together, the three boys slipped off into the night, Jerry purring softly in Ryan's arms as they hurried toward the castle's warm, torchlit corridors. Ryan pretended he had no idea what Harry and Ron were up to, but he quietly watched as they picked up the heavy leather satchel Lucius Malfoy had sent and stuffed the thick quilt inside. In this timeline, the Mirror of Erised hadn't been placed along the usual exit route from the library. Instead, it sat closer to Ravenclaw Tower, exactly where Harry remembered seeing it when he'd spent the night awake with it. That evening, cloaked in invisibility, Harry and Ron crept through the silent corridors until they came to the small stone room where the enchanted glass stood. "It's here! This is it!" Ron whispered, pushing the door open. Harry shrugged off the invisibility cloak, dropped the satchel on the cold floor, and hurried forward. He stood before the mirror, eyes shining, lips parting in a crooked smile as he drank in the image before him. Behind him, Ron jammed the door closed with a shove, then stooped and picked up the satchel. He pulled the quilt free and wrapped it snugly around his shoulders. "I'm freezing," he grumbled, teeth chattering. "Why the rush anyway? We've got all night." Harry didn't respond. His voice was low, urgent. "Did you see it?" I can't see anything." Ron hunched deeper into the quilt, peering over its edge. Look, they're all there." "There are so many of them," Harry said, his voice bright with excitement. He couldn't wait for his friends to meet his family. "I can only see you," Ron replied, peering around in confusion. If he hadn't known Harry as well as he did, he'd have assumed it was some sort of joke. Harry's grin faded. "Really, look more carefully. Come stand right where I am," Harry said, tugging Ron's sleeve and giving him an exasperated look. "Take a good look now.